Chapter 2640. My territory. Haha. Little girl, what's your name? The middle-aged man's rugged face was filled with a kind expression. However, this middle-aged man was truly too rugged and even seemed to be slightly ferocious. So, revealing a kind expression just like this caused the middle-aged man to seem even more ferocious. Guoyi, you truly look too ferocious. Fuck off. The old man with a goatee pushed the middle-aged man away and gazed at the young woman with a pleasant expression. Little girl, I'm Shahuai, a member of Sky Crane Lodge. Perhaps you don't know Sky Crane Lodge. Let me tell you, Sky Crane Lodge is a Daoist sect level power in Xianmi region, and this alone already surpasses many other powers. So long as you join Sky Crane Lodge, then I guarantee that you'll be able to smoothly attain the Dao and step foot into the second step of Dao attainment. It's even to the extent that you'll be able to enjoy all the benefits of Sky Crane Lodge. Damnable old bastard. The middle-aged man cursed loudly, and then he walked over to the side and gazed at the young woman with a pleasant expression. I'm Guoyi, a member of Lousy Gorge. Moreover, Lousy Gorge is a Daoist sect level power as well, and it's even slightly stronger than this old bastard's Sky Crane Lodge. If you join Lousy Gorge, then we'll agree to all the conditions of Lousy Gorge, and we can even make an exception and promote you to become the next master of Lousy Gorge. The old man's expression changed slightly. Guoyi is really ruthless. He actually directly raised such a condition. However, Shahuai was surprised because Guoyi's status in Lousy Gorge wasn't so high, so how could he possibly possess the authority to make someone become the next master of Lousy Gorge? Little girl, don't listen to this fellow's nonsense. He's only the master of the Heaven Dao, and he's only an inner court disciple in Lousy Gorge. How could he possibly possess such great authority? You'll definitely be tricked by him if you follow him, said Shahuai. Guoyi glared angrily. He was very displeased that Shahuai had exposed him, but he couldn't refute it. He'd really been bragging about the conditions from before, and he really didn't possess such great authority. However, with the natural endowment of an Earth Dao root, Guoyi knew that the master of Lousy Gorge would definitely attach great importance to it, and it was only a matter of time before this young woman became his successor. After all, a cultivator who possessed an Earth Dao root would definitely be able to attain the second step of Dao attainment in the future, and if they were lucky, then it was even possible for them to come into contact with the third step. Apart from Guoyi and Shahuai, there were representatives from other forces around them. However, these representatives were as silent as cicadas in winter, not daring to have the urge to interrupt. Regardless of whether it was Guoyi or Shahuai, both of them were only heavenly Dao masters, which was not much different from them. However, the forces behind Guoyi and Shahuai were much more powerful than them. They were just ordinary forces, but these two people were backed by Daoist forces. If they offended these two people, the forces behind them would suffer. Even though they coveted this woman who possessed an Earth-rank ancestral Dao root as well, they didn't dare compete with Guoyi and Shahuai for her. At this moment, the woman in Cheongsam had already arrived in front of the stone tablet. Seeing Shahuai and Guoyi fighting over it, she could not help but find it funny. Just as she was about to speak, an indifferent voice came from the depths of the mission hall. Did you get my permission to erect the stone tablet here? Did you get my permission to test my people here? And now, all of you want to take this person as your disciple. Did you get my permission? The voice was indifferent yet filled with energy, and it spread throughout the hall. Within the hall, Shahuai and Guoyi, who were arguing, immediately stopped, and they gazed with hostile gazes at the white-clothed young man who walked out from the depths of the hall. The beautiful eyes of the woman in Cheongsam even spun about, and her attention had descended onto the white-clothed young man as well. The peak of the extremes of life and death. When she noticed that the white-clothed young man's cultivation was merely at the peak of the extremes of life and death, a trace of disdain and indifference appeared in her beautiful eyes. The cultivators gathered around the stone tablet were all heavenly Dao masters. Amongst them, Guoyi and Shahuai were even at the peak of the heavenly Dao master realm. They possessed extraordinary strengths and numerous trump cards. Even a single heavenly Dao master wouldn't dare berate so casually when facing so many heavenly Dao masters. Yet now, when facing a few dozen heavenly Dao masters, Not only had this young man who was merely at the extremes of life and death spoken those words, he even had a calm expression as if there was nothing wrong with what he'd said just now. The woman in Cheongsam sneered in her heart. She felt that this white-clothed young man was too arrogant. How could he berate them with such a weak cultivation? Magatama and Uezu, who were following behind Zhuoan, were so scared that their legs went weak. In fact, both of them had long known that the cultivators around the stone tablet in the past few days were all ferocious people from the Xianmi heavenly domain. Their strengths were extremely terrifying, and they were all Dao validation experts. Any one of them was an existence that they looked up to, and even if they wanted to kill them, it would be as easy as squashing an ant. Originally, while following Zhuoan, both of them had vaguely hinted to Zhuoan that these people were not to be trifled with, and each of them was a powerful existence. However, judging from the current situation, Zhuoan had ignored their warning. It's over. The domain master is too impulsive. No matter how powerful he is, he can't withstand so many expert. This was the real thought of Magatama and Uezu at the moment, and they couldn't help but sigh in their hearts. The cultivators who were blocked by the invisible barrier outside the hall all showed eager expressions. Naturally, they recognized Zhuoan's identity. It's the domain master. The domain master has finally come out of seclusion. I didn't expect him to be so domineering as soon as he came out. Some cultivators were very excited and felt that the domain master's actions were really too hearty. The domain master is too impulsive. These people are all Dao validation experts. The domain master can't possibly be their opponents. It's really unwise to offend these people now. Some people were full of worry and felt that Zhuoan's actions were unthoughtful. Shehuai and Guoyi looked at Zhuoan coldly. Among them, Guoyi had a more fiery temper. He looked at Zhuoan coldly and said, "Who are you? How dare you interrupt us and speak such arrogant words?" Zhuoan calmly looked at Guoyi. Under the desperate eyes of Magatama and Uezu, Zhuoan said calmly, "I am the lord of the great Brahma domain. This is my territory. You are so presumptuous in my territory, and you dare to question me?" Guoyi was stunned. He didn't expect that the white-robed young man in front of him would be so courageous. He even dared to speak such arrogant words. Couldn't this guy see that they were from the Xianmi heavenly domain? Even if he couldn't see it, couldn't he sense that their cultivation was much stronger than his? Or could it be that this fellow was simply insensitive? "Who do you think you are? How dare you speak to me? Even if you are the lord of the heavenly domain, you have to kneel in front of me. You are just a life and death realm cultivator. What qualifications do you have to be arrogant?" Around the stone tablet, a skinny man who looked like a bamboo pole coldly snorted, jumped up, and punched towards Zhuoan. Wherever the fist passed, Dao charms superimposed, shocking everyone who was watching. The power of this punch was far beyond the life and death realm cultivators. Zhuoan sneered. His doppelganger had just advanced, and his main body had also reached the peak of the life and death realm. In addition, his doppelganger was in his main body, so he really didn't fear these people. Boom. Chapter 2641. One punch. This guy is crazy. Guoyi and Shehuai looked coldly at Zhuoan as if they were looking at a dead man. In their eyes, the lords of the 8 heavens were just decorations. They hadn't even reached the Dao confirming realm, so how could they be qualified to speak in front of them? Not to mention taking a place in the Great Brahma domain to test one's Dao root. Even if he took the entire Great Brahma domain, it would be a trivial matter in their eyes. After all, they were the true heavenly Dao masters. They also knew that with their cultivation, they were supreme existences in the 8 heavens. But this white-robed young man in front of them was extremely arrogant. He was just at the life and death extremes, yet he dared to provoke them. It was no different from courting death. The woman in the Cheongsam shook her head secretly. Although she didn't know the skinny man, she knew that he was a heavenly Dao master. Although he was only at the initial stage of the heavenly Dao master, he was far stronger than the life and death extremes. This white-robed young man, who claimed to be the lord of the Great Brahma domain, would soon die in front of them. The cultivators of the Great Brahma domain, who were blocked by the invisible barrier, couldn't bear to see this scene. They knew that Zhuoan was very strong and was recognized as the strongest person in the Great Brahma domain. But that was only limited to the Great Brahma domain. In their opinion, Zhuoan might not even be stronger than Sakyamuni. The group of people in front of them were all Tao-confirming realm experts from the Xian-Mi heavenly domain. Just the invisible aura they emitted was enough to make them tremble with fear. No matter how strong Zhuoan was, he was like an ant in front of this group of Tao-confirming realm experts. As the cultivators of the Great Brahma domain sighed helplessly and the experts of the Xian-Mi heavenly domain looked on mockingly, Zhuoan's punch finally collided with the skinny man. A ball of light, like a scorching sun, suddenly exploded from the collision between the two. Then, a powerful force produced a powerful wave of air that spread continuously in all directions. The powerful sound wave produced by the violent collision spread continuously in all directions, causing some of the people in the surroundings to involuntarily cover their ears. This spreading sound wave contained a unique Tao rhyme aura and a powerful trace of the heavenly Tao. If an ordinary life and death extremes expert were near this sound wave, they would definitely be torn apart by this Tao rhyme. However, Zhuoan stood unmoving like a boulder in front of everyone's incredulous gazes. On the other hand, the skinny man's expression became increasingly ugly. After which, he spat out a mouthful of blood and flew backwards miserably, smashing into the ground not far from the stone tablet. At this moment, the large hall was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. Everyone's eyes were gathered on the skinny man who had been knocked to the ground. Eyes, and many other inexplicable emotions. It was a long while later before a wave-like uproar was stirred. The numerous gazes that had originally landed on the skinny man had all turned towards the white-clothed young man in front of him, who stood like an immovable mountain. What happened just now? Am I seeing things? That expert from the Xian-Mi heavenly domain was actually knocked to the ground. You're not seeing things. He was indeed knocked to the ground. Moreover, it was the domain lord who defeated him. This so strong. Isn't this a Tao-confirming expert? Why does he look so weak? It's not that the expert from the Xian-Mi heavenly domain is weak, but our domain lord is hiding his strength. Outside the hall, many cultivators from the defy heavenly domain cheered. Their eyes were filled with excitement and reverence. When the experts from the Xian-Mi heavenly domain arrived here, they basically used a commanding tone. They had long disliked the strength of these experts from the Xian-Mi heavenly domain. However, their strength was far inferior to these experts, so they could only swallow their anger. Now, Zhuoan, the domain lord who represented their defy heavenly domain, was actually able to gain the upper hand in a head-on confrontation with one of the experts. For them, this was undoubtedly something worth encouraging. Compared to the liveliness at the entrance of the hall, the experts from the Xian-Mi heavenly domain around the stone tablet were silent. One of the cultivators came to the side of the thin man and observed for a while. His eyes became extremely gloomy. He's seriously injured. I'm afraid it'll take at least half a year for him to recover, the cultivator said with a heavy expression. The others fell silent. Most of them were from the ordinary forces of the Xian-Mi heavenly domain. Their strength was about the same as the thin man, and they were only at the initial stage of the heavenly Tao Lord. Even so, they could be considered as the mainstay of their respective forces. They couldn't be casually lost. Otherwise, it would be enough to cause serious damage to the forces behind them. The white-clothed young man in front of them had seriously injured the thin man in a head-on confrontation. It was obvious that the white-clothed young man was not simple. In addition, they basically came from different forces. Moreover, they were only there to serve as a foil for the selection of geniuses. The real choice was in the hands of Guoyi, Shehuai, and the woman in the Cheongsam. After knowing that the white-clothed young man was a tough nut to crack, they naturally couldn't take the initiative to step forward and ask for trouble. The woman in the Cheongsam looked surprised. She carefully sized up the white-clothed Zhuoan. Her beautiful peach blossom eyes seemed to be able to see through the white-clothed young man in front of her. But no matter how she sized him up, she still felt that the white-clothed young man was only at the two extremes of life and death. There was no aura of the way on him at all. This was really too strange. When did the two extremes of life and death become so abnormal that he could actually kill a heavenly Tao Lord like the Thin Man in a second? Although there were such monsters in the Xianmi heavenly domain, such monsters were all geniuses who were focused on cultivating by powerful forces at the Tao Palace level or above. However, the white-clothed young man in front of them was only from the 8 heavenly domains. How could such a monster be born in such a poor cultivation environment? If this was really the case, then how terrifying was the talent of the white-clothed young man in front of them? On the other hand, Guo Yi and Shi Huai were surprised and bewildered. Even though the Thin Man's strength was much inferior to them, he was the heavenly Tao Lord at any rate, right? Even if it was the two of them, it wouldn't be so easy for them to injure him with a single punch. But this young man who called himself the Region Lord of the Defan region had actually accomplished it right before their eyes. This was truly inconceivable. Big Brother Zhuo. Suddenly, the young woman that was tested to possess an Earth Tao root had charged out and arrived by Zhuowen's side. Because their attention had been constantly on Zhuowen, Shi Huai and Guo Yi had been caught off guard and allowed the young woman to slip away. Chapter 2642. Ren Zhuowen gazed at the woman before him, and his gaze revealed a trace of gentleness as he said, "Junior Sister Chimei, congratulations. You actually possess an Earth-grade ancestral Tao root. Your future is limitless." Zhuowen had heard about ancestral Tao roots from Mu Chunxue. When Mu Chunxue went to Hu Divine Temple all those years ago, Sun Qi had tested the ancestral Tao roots of the representatives of the various territories. He knew that Yaro Shengjuan possessed a profound grade ancestral Tao root, and it could be considered to be a very good ancestral Tao root. On the other hand, the NTI Shiva's ancestral Tao root had exceeded Zhuowen's expectations, and it was actually an Earth-grade ancestral Tao root. Fortunately, the NTI Shiva had been completely eliminated by Zhuowen. Otherwise, if he allowed her to continue cultivating in Xianmi heavenly region, then she would probably be quite a big threat to him. However, Zhuowen had never imagined that Tong Chimei would actually possess an Earth-grade ancestral Tao root as well. After all, even in Xianmi heavenly region, such an ancestral Tao root was a 1 in a million genius. Tong Chimei possessed an Earth-grade ancestral Tao root, so her future was limitless indeed. Tong Chimei was still slightly puzzled until now. It was the first time she'd heard of an ancestral Tao root, and it seemed like possessing an ancestral Tao root was equivalent to possessing the qualifications to attain the Tao. Now, when she saw Zhuowen congratulate her, she felt slightly uneasy instead, and she hurriedly explained. "Big Brother Zhuo, I don't intend to head to Xianmi heavenly region. I'm a member of Snow Palace, so I won't." Zhuowen interrupted Tong Chimei and said, "Junior Sister Chimei, there's no need to panic. It's a good thing that you possess an Earth-grade ancestral Tao root. A genius like you will definitely possess great accomplishments in Xianmi heavenly region. However, I won't allow you to casually join some powers, and I'll definitely help you choose a power that's suitable for you. Besides that, leaving the 8 great heavens is only a matter of time. There'll be a great calamity here in the future, and both of us won't be able to escape it. Staying here will only increase the sacrifices." Zhuowen spoke the last sentence via voice transmission. Tong Chimei was stunned, and then she nodded obediently and said, "Big Brother Zhuo, I'll listen to you. Who exactly are you?" Guo Yi looked gloomily at Zhuowen, who was talking to Tong Chimei, and said coldly. Zhuowen looked at Guo Yi and said calmly, "Didn't I say it before? I am the domain lord of the Great Brahma domain, and this mission hall and the Wen Snow Palace are both my territories. You came to my territory without my permission and took away my people. Isn't this like a turtle dove occupying a magpie's nest?" Guo Yi frowned slightly and said coldly, "Although you have some skill, you should know that you are facing someone you can't afford to offend. I am the representative of Xianmi heavenly domain's Broken Valley. I am just borrowing your territory. Moreover, without us, how could you cultivators have the ability to go to the Xianmi heavenly domain on your own? This is the only way for you to leave the Xianmi heavenly domain. After all, the heavenly moat is extremely dangerous. Even first-step Dao confirming experts have the risk of dying there." As soon as Guo Yi's words came out, many cultivators at the entrance of the hall were moved. The matter of the Xian-Mi heavenly domain was no longer a secret. Everyone knew that there was a heavenly moat in the extraterritorial starry sky, and on the other side of the heavenly moat was the legendary ninth heaven, the Xian-Mi heavenly domain. Many cultivators even believed that as long as they entered the Xian-Mi heavenly domain, they would be able to smoothly reach Tao confirming, obtain better cultivation resources, and have a better future. Most of them longed for the Xian-Mi heavenly domain, but they also knew that the heavenly moat was extremely terrifying. If they were not Tao confirming cultivators, they would be courting death if they went there. However, Guo Yi's words were extremely tempting. Even if he had not reached the Tao confirming realm, he could still take everyone to the Xian-Mi heavenly domain. Zhuowen looked at Guo Yi, his eyes flashing, and said lightly, "What did you rely on to get here?" The dozens of people in front of him obviously came together. Most likely, they had some kind of flying divine tool that could allow them to cross the heavenly moat. Zhuowen only knew about the heavenly moat from the records of the Great Brahma domain. As for how dangerous the heavenly moat was, Zhuowen had never personally experienced it. Zhuowen was guessing whether his spacetime roulette could cross the heavenly moat. Guo Yi said proudly, "If you want to cross the heavenly moat, you must have a special flying ship. However, you don't need to know what it is. This is our secret." Zhuowen squinted his eyes and looked at Guo Yi unkindly. He knew that this fella said this on purpose. "You can say that we are helping you by selecting talents here. Your 8 heavenly domains will not be peaceful soon, and there might even be a great calamity. The longer you stay here, the more dangerous it will be. I am helping you by taking you with me." Shi Huai also came out to speak, and he spoke loudly towards the entrance of the hall. The noisy crowd of cultivators at the entrance of the main hall quieted down. Their eyes were filled with hope and hope. If they were chosen, they would be able to directly enter the Xian-Mi heavenly region. Some cultivators even started to complain that Zhuowen interfered with their test. Therefore, their complaints were not loud. However, with Zhuowen's current cultivation, he naturally heard them clearly. Zhuowen shook his head and sighed in his heart. He knew that these cultivators were only convinced by his strength. Once he, Zhuowen, failed to protect them, they would immediately betray him. Originally, Zhuowen wanted to help these cultivators of the Wen Snow Palace. However, his interest was waning now. "Brother Zhuo, you are not a saint. You are also a human. You don't need everyone to help you. You only need to help your friends and family who are worthy of your trust. After all, a person's strength is limited." Beside Zhuowen, Tong Chimei also noticed Zhuowen's strange state. She also heard the complaints from the crowd. She quickly persuaded Zhuowen in a low voice. "I know this." Zhuowen nodded. He looked at Guo Yi and Shi Huai and said, "As long as they agree to take the test, I will not object. However, the Wen Snow Palace is my territory. Now, get out. If you want to take the test, just choose a square outside. Save me the trouble of looking at you." Zhuowen's words were not polite at all. Immediately, the experts of the Xian-Mi heavenly domain around the stone tablet glared at him. They felt that this domain lord of the Great Brahma heavenly domain was too arrogant. He had only defeated one of them. Moreover, he was the weakest among them. Yet, he dared to challenge them so openly. If they moved the test stone tablet out because of this person's words, when this matter spread to the Xian-Mi heavenly domain, they would lose all their face. Guo Yi and Shi Huai's expressions were not good. They looked coldly at Zhuowen. "It is indeed wrong for us to set up the test stone tablet here without your permission. How about this? We can pay you the corresponding rent." Shi Huai's eyes revealed a sly look as he said rather amiably. Guo Yi's eyes lit up. He glanced at Shi Huai. Apparently, he also thought of Shi Huai's idea. However, he did not say anything. Chapter 2643. Awkward Situation Rent. Zhuowen raised an eyebrow and looked at Shi Huai, waiting for him to continue. "Yes, how about this? All 8 heavens should need divine stones, right? We won't take advantage of you. A day's rent is 100 supreme-grade divine stones. We've been here for 4 days, so we can pay you 400 supreme-grade divine stones first," Shi Huai said indifferently. Magatama and Uezu had already arrived by Zhuowen's side. After hearing Shi Huai's payment, both of them heaved a sigh of relief in their hearts. They didn't feel that there was anything wrong with Shi Huai's payment. Zhuowen sneered in his heart. Supreme-grade divine stones were basically useless to him. He knew that supreme-grade divine stones were very valuable in the 8 heavens, but in the eyes of the Xianmi Heavenly Region's Heavenly Tao Masters, they were no different from trash. Trying to get rid of Zhuowen with something that was trash in the eyes of others? Wasn't it a little too idealistic? Shi Huai frowned when he saw Zhuowen's indifference, and he said, "You think it's too little? Then I'll double it. 200 supreme-grade divine stones a day." Zhuowen replied indifferently, 1 high-grade Heavenly Tao origin crystal a day. Otherwise, there's no need to talk. Shi Huai and the others were shocked when they heard this, and they looked at Zhuowen strangely. This fellow knows about Heavenly Tao origin crystals? The woman in the Cheongsam looked at Zhuowen curiously. She was sure that only the Xianmi Heavenly Region had Heavenly Tao origin crystals, and it was impossible for the 8 heavens to have them. However, this so-called region master of the Great Brahma region not only possessed unfathomable strength, but also knew about Heavenly Tao origin crystals. At this moment, this person was shrouded in a dense and mysterious aura. Shi Huai, Guoyi, and the others' expressions changed slightly. The reason Shi Huai raised the rent was naturally because he felt that this white-clothed young man didn't know about Heavenly Tao origin crystals. However, he hadn't expected this young man to ask for high-grade Heavenly Tao origin crystals right away. This was simply asking for too much. They were merely Heavenly Tao lords and only had low-grade Heavenly Tao origin crystals on them. They didn't even have mid-grade Heavenly Tao origin crystals, let alone high-grade ones. Moreover, high-grade Heavenly Tao origin crystals were used by second-step Tao validation experts for cultivation. They were not qualified to use high-grade Heavenly Tao origin crystals, let alone possess such Heavenly Tao origin crystals. If you don't, then tear down this stele. Don't obstruct my territory. Seeing the expressions of Shi Huai and the others, Zhuowen knew that they did not have any high-grade Heavenly Tao origin crystals on them. Zhuowen finally understood the value of high-class Heavenly Tao origin crystals. This group of people were all Heavenly Tao masters, and some of them came from powerful Daoist sects. Yet, none of them actually had high-class Heavenly Tao origin crystals. From this, it could be seen just how precious high-grade Heavenly Law origin crystals were. As for the special-grade Heaven's Path origin crystals, they were even more precious than high-grade Heaven's Path origin crystals. When he thought about how he had used up the only 20 special-grade Heavenly Tao origin crystals on him, Zhuowen felt a faint heartache. However, he did not regret it. At least those 20 special-grade Heavenly Tao origin crystals had allowed his clone to successfully advance to the 2-star realm. However, Zhuowen was a little worried about his clone's future path of advancement. Just advancing from 1-star to 2-star required such a terrifying amount of energy. Coupled with the preciousness of the special-grade Heavenly Tao origin crystals, wouldn't his clone need even more special-grade Heavenly Tao origin crystals to advance to a higher level in the future? Thinking of this, Zhuowen felt a little vexed. Shi Huai's gaze was cold as he said, "Aren't you being too arrogant? We've already made concessions, yet you're still pushing your luck. Do you really think we're easy to bully?" As he spoke, Shi Huai took a step forward, and his powerful aura poured out without holding back at all. On the other hand, Guoyi took a step forward with Shi Huai, and his gaze was extremely cold and indifferent as well. A disdainful smile appeared on the corners of Zhuowen's mouth. Shi Huai and Guoyi were indeed slightly stronger than the others here. Based on their auras, it was obvious that they were probably peak Heavenly Law lords. What was worth Zhuowen's attention was that the steel giant standing beside the woman in the Cheongsam gave Zhuowen a sense of danger. Obviously, the strongest in this group was probably not Shi Huai and Guoyi, but the steel giant that had never spoken a word. He doesn't know how to appreciate kindness. The Cheongsam woman shook her head. She felt that Zhuowen was pushing his luck. On the other hand, the steel giant suddenly spoke. Instead of saying that he's pushing his luck, "I feel that we're pushing our luck too far. This is his territory, so he's naturally displeased by our sudden intrusion. If he was just a weakling, Then he would naturally not dare to go head-on against us. However, he isn't weak, and is even very strong. Any expert would absolutely not allow others to casually bully them like this. Moreover, as far as I'm concerned, he's already shown mercy to us. At the very least, he didn't attack us right away and just asked us to tear down the stone steely and test it. That request isn't going too far. It's Shuhui and Guoyi who've gone too far. The Cheongsam woman gazed at the steel giant with surprise. She was clearly aware that this bodyguard by her side had a taciturn character and didn't really like to talk. However, the steel giant had actually spoken so much because of the white-clothed young man. She could discern that the steel giant attached great importance to the white-clothed young man. The Cheongsam woman asked casually, Shuhui and Guoyi are both peak heavenly law lords, and they're much stronger than that fellow from before. Moreover, they've joined forces. How many moves do you think that kid can resist against their joint forces? My lady, you think too highly of Shuhui and Guoyi. As far as I'm concerned, neither of them is a match for this kid. The steel giant said firmly. The Cheongsam woman's pupils shrank as she looked at the steel giant seriously. Seeing that the steel giant didn't seem to be joking, she felt very uneasy. She didn't doubt the steel giant's judgment because the steel giant was very strong, far stronger than anyone else present. He was a true powerhouse of the Purple-Red House, and his strength was at least that of a Daoyuan master. Moreover, the steel giant was only guessing that the steel giant was a Daoyuan master. The Cheongsam woman had never seen the steel giant use his full strength. Even her father had great respect for the steel giant, which spoke volumes of the steel giant's strength. Although the steel giant had a very high opinion of Zhuoan, the Cheongsam woman still didn't think much of it. In this regard, she still insisted that the white-clothed young man couldn't possibly be a match for Shuhui and Guoyi when they joined forces. The steel giant also felt the Cheongsam woman's disapproval, but he didn't say anything else. He knew that this kind of thing didn't have much credibility. Chapter 2644. Shuhui and Guoyi teamed up. At this moment, the atmosphere in the mission hall was extremely solemn. The people on the stone tablet could not help but take a few steps back, leaving only Shuhui and Guoyi standing side by side. Their eyes were filled with ridicule. Although Zhuoan had shocked everyone by injuring the skinny man with a single move, Shuhui and Guoyi were not people that the skinny man could compare to. Moreover, Shuhui and Guoyi were both peak heavenly Dao masters. They were much stronger than the skinny man. Moreover, the two of them had teamed up to deal with the white-clothed young man. In their opinion, with Shuhui and Guoyi teaming up, they would definitely be able to defeat the white-clothed young man. Brother Zhuo, Governor, Tong Chimei, Magatama, and Yuezu stood behind Zhuoan and looked at Zhuoan worriedly. The cultivators outside the hall also quieted down. They didn't say anything to cheer for Zhuowen. Most of them were worried that if they supported Zhuoan in this battle, the experts from the Xianmi Heavenly Domain would make things difficult for them and would not bring them to the Xianmi Heavenly Domain. Even though Zhuoan was their governor, they all kept silent. It was as if Zhuowen's battle had nothing to do with them. Zhuowen saw everyone's reaction. Although he looked calm on the surface, he was still a little disappointed. Whoosh! At this moment, Shuhui and Guoyi had already dashed out. They turned into two streams of flowing light and rushed towards Zhuoan from the left and right. Their Daoist rhymes spread out like waves in the surrounding space. The terrifying Daoist rhymes roared like a tsunami and filled the entire mission hall. The originally sturdy mission hall could not withstand the terrifying aura of Daoist rhymes and started to crack. Even the experts from the Xianmi Heavenly Domain around the stone tablet retreated. They did not dare to get too close to Shuhui and Guoyi. The cultivators outside the hall had already retreated far away. The battle between the Heavenly Dao Masters was not something they could casually interfere with. Even if they got close, they risked being killed. Therefore, they had to be careful. Rumble. Before Shuhui and Guoyi could even get close to Zhuoan, the mission hall was finally unable to withstand the terrifying pressure and turned into dust. The originally majestic mission hall was now in ruins. Zhuowen's expression was ugly. Although the mission hall had a level 9 defensive array that he had personally set up, it was still not enough. However, in the eyes of peak experts like Shi Huai and Guo Yi, who were Heaven Downlords, the level 9 defensive hall was nothing. The two of you will pay for this. Zhuowen's voice was icy cold. He felt that he had made a mistake. Even if he wanted to fight with these two, he should have left the mission hall. That way, the mission hall wouldn't have been reduced to ruins. Shi Huai sneered. His right hand had taken out a white token at an unknown time. This token was covered in dense Dao patterns. This was a genuine heavenly Dao grade divine artifact. Its Daoist rhyme was so powerful that it was as if the heavenly Dao had personally descended. Guo Yi also took out a heavenly Dao grade divine artifact. His divine artifact was a huge staff, much longer than himself. However, it was very thin, like an ordinary bamboo pole. At first glance, it looked very strange. Boom. Boom. The moment Shi Huai and Guo Yi took out their respective heavenly Dao grade divine artifacts, they blasted out powerful attacks towards Zhuowen. The blazing energy light completely engulfed Zhuowen's figure. Tong Chimei had already been pulled away by Magatama and Yuezu to a distance. She looked at the scene in horror. The attacks that Shi Huai and Guo Yi blasted out were too terrifying. The two of them couldn't help but have the urge to bow down and worship them. They couldn't even muster up the slightest thought of resisting. They knew that if they were to face such attacks, they could only kneel on the ground, close their eyes, and wait for death. As for Zhuowen, their eyes were filled with worry. They didn't know if Zhuowen could withstand such terrifying attacks. Once Zhuowen fell, the two of them knew very well that the Wen Shui Palace would be in chaos. Steel Plume, it seems like you've misjudged. This kid is only SOSO. I'm afraid he's already fallen. The woman in the Cheongsam stood in the distance with her arms crossed. She couldn't help but shake her head as she watched the figure being engulfed by Shi Huai and Guo Yi's powerful attacks. The steel giant didn't speak. He just silently watched the battle in front of him, as if the battle hadn't ended yet. The woman in the Cheongsam curled her lips when she saw the steel giant's appearance. She looked forward lazily. Then, her beautiful eyes shrank, revealing a look of horror. She saw that the attacks that Shi Huai and Guo Yi blasted out were suddenly broken by an even more powerful force. The white token and long stick flew back and fell into the hands of Shi Huai and Guo Yi. As the light receded, a figure stood proudly. Around this figure was a grey long sword that was circling around him like a snake. At the same time, this person held two swords. One sword was surrounded by thunder and fire, while the other sword was filled with blood qi. These two swords were naturally the Thunder Fire Sword and the Blood Immortal Sword. During this period of time with Zhuowen, the cultivation of the Thunder Fire Sword and the Blood Immortal Sword had not been neglected. At this moment, both of them had been promoted to the level of Heavenly Path Divine Weapons. It should be noted that when Zhuowen was in seclusion, he had always released the Thunder Fire Sword and the Blood Immortal Sword when he was absorbing the special class Heavenly Path Origin Crystal. These two divine swords could be said to be bathed in the energy of the Heavenly Path Origin Crystal at all times. Even if they were only absorbing the Heavenly Path energy emitted from the special class Heavenly Path Origin Crystal, they would still benefit immensely. When the doppelganger successfully advanced to the 2-star realm, the Thunder Fire Sword and the Blood Immortal Sword almost simultaneously became divine weapons of Dao validation. It could be said that Zhuowen had 3 Heavenly Path divine swords, including the Death Sacrifice Sword. Whoosh! The moment he broke through Shi Huai and Guo Yi's attacks, Zhuowen took a step forward. The Death Sacrifice Sword had already swept out and rushed towards Shi Huai and Guo Yi. Zhuowen followed closely behind like a maggot in a tarsal bone. Clang! Clang! In just an instant, the Death Sacrifice Sword collided with the divine weapons in Shi Huai and Guo Yi's hands. The two of them worked together and naturally forced the Death Sacrifice Sword away. The moment the Death Sacrifice Sword was forced away, Zhuowen was already closing in like a god descending from the heavens. Shi Huai and Guo Yi's expressions changed slightly. After all, Zhuowen's speed was just too fast. They had been focused on blasting away the sacrifice of Death Sword earlier and hadn't expected that Zhuowen would also come over. Of course, what surprised them even more was that Zhuowen was actually unscathed. The two of them had joined forces and attacked with all their might, but they were unable to cause any injury to this person. This made them feel a chill in their hearts. They realized that they had somewhat underestimated this person. White Yingling. Shi Huai snorted coldly and pointed his sword finger at the token in his hand. Immediately, the token's surface lit up, and then endless white mist filled the air. In the depths of the rolling white mist, a huge white shadow appeared in front of Zhuowen as if it had teleported, blocking Zhuowen's advance. Zhuowen snorted coldly and flicked the blood-immortal sword in his left hand upwards. Instantly, blood-colored energy soared into the sky and turned into a huge pillar of blood, blasting away all the white mist. Chapter 2645. Zhuowen stood in the air and slashed out with the Thunderfire sword. Instantly, a terrifying thunderfire with the power to burn the heavens blasted into the void, leaving a huge ravine in the starry sky. The ravine was filled with dense thunderfire. The moment the white shadow was struck by the Thunderfire sword, it collapsed and dissipated. Shi Huai let out a muffled groan and couldn't help but retreat as he looked at Zhuowen in horror. Fortunately, Guoyi reacted quickly and swung his staff. Countless staff shadows fell like rain in front of Zhuowen, blocking Zhuowen's move that was sure to kill Shi Huai. "Don't hold back, let's deal with him together," Guoyi said to Shi Huai. His aura burst forth, and the long staff in his hands seemed to come alive. Layer after layer of staff smashed towards Zhuowen in an endless stream. However, they managed to block Zhuowen's powerful attack, causing Zhuowen's attack on Shi Huai to slow down by quite a bit. Shi Huai also came to his senses and immediately took out the token. He activated the power of the token and joined forces with Guoyi to attack Zhuowen. Zhuowen held his swords with both hands, looking like a god or a demon. When he swung his swords, they could burn the horizon, shatter the earth, and distort the starry sky. At the same time, the sacrificial death sword was shooting arrows from the shadows. Under the control of Zhuowen's powerful spiritual sense, it flew freely, causing Shi Huai and Guoyi to be in a difficult situation. The two of them were originally at a disadvantage when facing Zhuowen, who wielded two swords. Now, with the addition of the sacrificial death sword, the two of them were naturally at a disadvantage. Especially when the sacrificial death sword was controlled by Zhuowen's spiritual sense, it was not the slightest bit inferior to an ordinary heavenly Tao master. This made their hearts sink. They had already overestimated Zhuowen as much as possible, but now that they were fighting, they realized that they had greatly underestimated him. This kid actually had 3 heavenly Tao divine artifacts, and his strength was actually so heaven-defying. Zhuowen, on the other hand, was indifferent. He didn't even use the power of his doppelganger. Instead, he used the divine energy of his main body and his powerful spiritual sense to firmly suppress Shi Huai and Guoyi. Of course, if he only relied on the divine energy of his main body, it would be impossible for him to be a match for the two of them. However, Zhuowen was able to rely on 3 heavenly Tao-grade divine artifacts and his powerful divine sense to suppress the combined forces of Shi Huai and Guoyi. Of course, if Zhuowen used his doppelganger, he would be able to kill the two of them with a single punch. Of course, the heavenly Tao master's main body. Of the heavenly Tao master's main body, he knew very well that his main body's soul was far more powerful than others of the same level. Even a Tao affirmation expert might not necessarily be a match for his main body. Of Zhuowen had the heavenly Tao master's main body was of heavenly Tao master Zhuowen's main body. Now it seemed like he didn't just have the strength to fight, he'd even suppressed the joint forces of Shi Huai and Guoyi. The people in the surroundings were dumbstruck. Zhuowen is too abnormal. He's clearly only at the extremes of life and death, yet he's actually in an invincible position against the joint forces of 2 peak heavenly Tao masters. Moreover, he seems to have the upper hand. Big Brother Zhuo is so strong. Tong Chimei revealed a shocked expression, and then her eyes were filled with admiration. Magatama and Yuezu were completely stunned, and then they were overjoyed when they recovered from their shock. They hadn't expected Zhuowen's strength to be so terrifying. Shi Huai and Guoyi were clearly the strongest amongst the group, yet they couldn't do anything to Zhuowen even after joining forces. Instead, they were suppressed. It was truly inconceivable. The region lord is actually so strong. Many cultivators outside the hall were dumbstruck, and they didn't know how to express their feelings at this moment. Are they really from the 8 great heavens? Is he really at the extremes of life and death? He's at the extremes of life and death that even Shuhui and Guoyi couldn't do anything to. His heaven-defying. All the experts around the stone stele were dumbstruck, and they were in an uproar of disbelief. The woman in the Cheongsam watched this scene while her ample bosom rose and fell, and it carried a unique charm. How formidable! How could he be so formidable? She muttered slightly. The steel giant stood silently beside the woman in the Cheongsam, silently watching everything in front of him. He did not say a word, as if he had already guessed that this would happen. Suddenly, countless sword images swiftly slashed out from Zhuowen's hands. Shi Huai and Guoyi's expressions changed slightly, and they couldn't help but retreat repeatedly. Just as the two of them retreated, a silent shadow took advantage of the gap between the two of them and stabbed towards Shi Huai's forehead. Shi Huai reacted swiftly and immediately dodged to the side. The phantom pierced through Shi Huai's shoulder blade, causing blood to spray as it pierced through Shi Huai's shoulder. Guoyi's expression changed greatly, and he swung the long staff in his hand, smashing the sneak attack of the death sacrifice sword away. The death sacrifice sword didn't continue to attack after its successful attack, but instead fled into the starry sky like a viper, waiting for its next prey. Seeing the death sacrifice sword disappear, Guoyi and Shi Huai felt a headache coming on. After the battle earlier, they were actually not afraid of Zhuo when they joined forces. However, the main reason they were at a disadvantage was because of the strange and unpredictable sacrificial death sword's continuous sneak attacks, causing the two of them to be exhausted from running for their lives. Therefore, it was able to succeed. As long as they could suppress the death sacrifice sword, the two of them wouldn't be in such a sorry state. Everyone, who is willing to fight side by side with us? This boy is too arrogant, actually ignoring us. As cultivators from Xianmi Heavenly Domain, how can we be bullied by a cultivator from such a low-level heavenly domain? Shi Huai suddenly said to the other cultivators behind the stone stele. Guoyi also hurriedly said, "Everyone, don't worry. As long as you can help us kill this boy, you will gain the friendship of my Broken Valley and Sky Crane abode. Moreover, we have the authority to let you enter the Broken Valley and Sky Crane abode to cultivate for a period of time." Originally, everyone snorted at Shi Huai's words, but Guoyi's words completely moved them. The only difference between a Daoist sect level force and a normal sect level force was that a Daoist sect level force could set up their own Daoist sect in the Xianmi Heavenly Domain and trigger the Heavenly Dao rules. Under the Daoist sect level force, a powerful Heavenly Dao dragon vein would form. Because of the Heavenly Dao dragon vein, the disciples of a Dao sect level force could cultivate much faster than ordinary forces. Chapter 2646. Fear and trepidation. Although Guoyi and Shi Huai were not particularly important figures in their respective factions, they at least had a certain level of authority. It was still possible for them to give them preferential treatment and fight for a period of time to enter their factions to cultivate. Moreover, this kind of thing was actually something that many Daoist-level factions had. It was just that some Daoist-level factions' disciples did it very secretly, and the higher-ups simply did not know. Moreover, even if they knew, as long as there were no major changes, they would probably not care. After all, the Heavenly Dao Dragon Vein belonged to their Daoist-level factions. It was endless, and it was very difficult to exhaust it. Guoyi's promise was truly related to their interests, so they really could not refuse. One had to know that there was a huge difference between cultivating in an ordinary place and on the Heavenly Dao Dragon Vein. Brother Guo must be joking. We are all cultivators of the Xianmi Heavenly Region, so we should help each other. That's right. A mere life and death stage cultivator from the 8 great heavenly regions dares to be so arrogant with just 3 Heavenly Dao level artifacts. Today, we will teach this arrogant brat a good lesson on behalf of Brother Shi and Brother Guo. The people who were originally hesitating left the stone stele one after another and rushed towards Shi Huai and Guoyi. Soon, they surrounded Shi Huai and Guoyi. The people around the stone tablet quickly left, leaving only the Chipao woman and the steel giant standing not far away, unmoved by Guoyi's words. You guys are so despicable. You can't win, So you plan to gang up on him? Tong Chimei's pretty face changed slightly, and could not help but criticize. Magatama and Uezu were also extremely angry. Shi Huai and the others could not be bothered with Tong Chimei's criticism. Instead, they coldly looked at Zhuowen. Brat, I underestimated you. However, no matter how strong you are, how strong can you be? Today, I will kill you here. Shi Huai's eyes were gloomy as he looked at Zhuowen, revealing traces of killing intent. Just now, the sacrifice death sword had pierced through his shoulder blade, causing him to lose all face. His killing intent towards Zhuowen was boundless. Zhuowen looked at the group of people in front of him indifferently, the corner of his mouth curling into a cold smile. I think it's best if you guys don't participate in the battle between me and these two, otherwise, you will regret it. Haha. Are you kidding me? Right now, you're already a fish on the chopping board. What qualifications do you have to be arrogant with us? Regret? Do you really not understand the current situation? A cultivator sneered at Zhuowen, his eyes full of mockery. Unfortunately, as soon as this cultivator finished speaking, a shadow suddenly swept towards the back of this cultivator's head like a poisonous snake. By the time the cultivator realized what was happening, it was already too late. The phantom pierced through the back of his head, causing blood to splatter everywhere. His head exploded, and he died on the spot. Whoosh! The surrounding cultivators scattered, not daring to get close to this cultivator. Only then did they realize that the one who had suddenly killed this cultivator was a grey divine sword. It was Zhuowen's sacrificial death sword. How dare you! Guo Yi roared. He took a step forward and smashed out his long stick. Countless stick shadows emitted blazing golden light. It was as if countless small suns had exploded. It was extremely terrifying. Kill. The moment Guo Yi moved, Shi Huai also took out his token and followed closely behind Guo Yi. The other cultivators also blasted out their own attacks. All kinds of dazzling lights exploded in the air around Zhuowen. It was extremely terrifying. Seeing this scene, the Cheongsam woman could not help but shake her head. Zhuowen's strength was indeed terrifying. Although he was only at the two extremes of life and death, he was able to suppress Shi Huai and Guo Yi so ruthlessly. But now, it was not just Shi Huai and Guo Yi. There were more than 40 people, and all of them were heavenly Dao masters. This was a terrifying force. No matter how powerful Zhuowen was, it was destined that two fists would not be able to fight against four hands. Unless Zhuowen was a true primordial Dao expert. But if Zhuowen was really a primordial Dao expert, Shi Huai and Guo Yi would definitely have been able to crush him and not be in a stalemate with him. Not necessarily. Steel Plume said again. The Cheongsam woman was too lazy to pay attention to Steel Plume's words. With such a lineup, it was obvious that Zhuowen was going to die. Steel Plume actually still had hope for Zhuowen. This made the Cheongsam woman slightly disappointed in Steel Plume. Zhuowen's eyes were bloodthirsty. He looked at the surrounding cultivators with a murderous aura. Zhuowen took a step forward and slashed out two swords with both hands. Shi Huai and Guo Yi were forced to retreat. Shi Huai and Guo Yi's expressions changed greatly. They felt that Zhuowen's strength seemed to have become stronger than before. Could it be an illusion? Poochie. The moment Shi Huai and Guo Yi were forced to retreat, Zhuowen suddenly threw out two swords. The Thunder Fire Sword and the Blood Immortal Sword shuttled out like lightning. In an instant, the two closest cultivators were forced to retreat. Zhuowen took a step forward and arrived in front of the cultivator in the front. He threw out a punch. The moment the punch was thrown out, the aura in his body gradually woke up like a sleeping beast. Boom! The sound of an explosion was heard. Immediately, the cultivator was blasted into a mist of blood by Zhuowen's punch. At the same time, Zhuowen's empty left hand grabbed out in the air and grabbed onto the right arm of the cultivator on the left that intended to launch a surprise attack against him, and then he suddenly squeezed and actually tore off this person's left arm. Slaughtering Dao Finger. After killing one and injuring another, Zhuowen made a gesture with both hands. Suddenly, the surrounding energy of the Way of Heaven gathered and finally formed a terrifyingly huge finger. He threw it behind him. The 3 cultivators who wanted to sneak up on him were immediately blasted into powder by the slaughtering Dao finger. The slaughtering Dao finger was definitely one of Zhuowen's trump cards. It was clearly said that this divine ability could kill the master of the way of heaven if it was cultivated to the peak. Now that Zhuowen's original body and doppelganger had combined, the slaughtering Dao finger was extremely terrifying. It was naturally easy to kill the master of the way of heaven. In just an instant, 4 people were killed and 1 was seriously injured. Everyone was shocked. Unfortunately, Zhuowen did not give them time to be shocked. He took a step forward and completely displayed the power of the Pangu sacred body. He rushed into the crowd like a tiger in a flock of sheep. Unexpectedly, not a single cultivator was able to block Zhuowen's attack. The strength of these cultivators was far inferior to that of Shi Huai and Guo Yi. Although they were also masters of the way of heaven, they were only at the early stage of the way of heaven. They were at the same level as the skinny man who had been seriously injured by Zhuowen. In front of the Pangu sacred body, they were no different from weaklings. The battle between more than 40 masters of the way of heaven and Zhuowen, who was only at the 2 extremes of life and death, should have been a one-sided battle. However, in the end, they were crushed. The woman in the Cheongsam was dumbfounded. She looked at the scene in disbelief. She felt that what she was seeing now was the most absurd thing she had ever seen. More than 40 masters of the way of heaven were being slaughtered like weaklings in front of the 2 extremes of life and death. This was too terrifying and abnormal. As for Shi Huai and Guo Yi, they had already quietly retreated when Zhuowen had unleashed his full strength. They were trembling with fear. At this moment, Zhuowen was simply the most terrifying devil god. He was like a completely different person compared to the Zhuowen who had fought with them before. What's going on? Has this man been hiding his strength all this time? Why is he so terrifying? Shi Huai trembled and said in a daze. Chapter 2647. Defeat the enemy attack. Shi Huai's eyes were filled with hatred. As soon as Guo Yi finished speaking, he flew out with the token in his hand, intending to fight Zhuowen to the death. Guo Yi followed closely behind. The Dao inscriptions on the surface of the long rod in his hand began to emit a dazzling light. Obviously, Guo Yi was also going all out. At this moment, nearly half of the 40-plus practitioners in the field had been killed by Zhuowen. The rest of the practitioners were terrified and no longer dared to attack Zhuowen. They retreated to the periphery of the battle and watched the scene in horror. Shi Huai and Guo Yi also rushed over at this moment. The aura on their bodies had swelled to the peak. It was as if 2 invisible angry dragons were wrapping around them, carrying a shocking might. Hiss! Shi Huai and Guo Yi held their respective divine artifacts and turned into 2 swift streaks of light, breaking through the sky. The explosive sounds in the air made the listeners want to cover their ears and scream hysterically. Everyone was paying attention to the streamers that Shi Huai and Guo Yi had turned into. They could see that Guo Yi and Shi Huai were going all out. This attack was more terrifying than any of their previous attacks. It was enough to kill any heavenly Dao master in an instant. Even a Dao Yuan master would not be able to escape. Shi Huai and Guo Yi are burning their blood essence. They are going all out. Not far away, the woman in the Cheongsam frowned slightly. The combat strength of 2 peak heavenly Dao masters who were burning their blood essence was extremely terrifying. It was comparable to an ordinary Dao Yuan master. Even Steel Plume would not choose to face Shi Huai and Guo Yi's desperate attacks head-on. Thinking of this, the woman in the Cheongsam rolled her beautiful eyes and could not help but look at the white-clothed young man. She knew that the white-clothed young man would choose to retreat. After all, Shi Huai and Guo Yi's desperate attacks were very powerful. Not only the woman in the Cheongsam, but the others also had the same thought. They did not believe that Zhuowen would really dare to face this attack head-on. Of course, they also knew that once Zhuowen chose to retreat, he would face the continuous attacks of Shi Huai and Guo Yi. At that time, the advantage that Zhuowen originally had would disappear in this retreat. But soon, Zhuowen's next move shocked everyone. Zhuowen slowly turned around and looked indifferently at the 2 streamers that were rushing towards him. Then, he stomped his feet on the ground, clenched his right hand into a fist, and punched out. This punch was simple, without any fancy moves. It didn't even have the aura of Runher Daoist rhyme. This guy. He actually chose to fight head-on? Is he crazy? The Cheongsam woman's pupils shrank as she almost exclaimed out loud. She looked at Zhuo Wen in disbelief. An uproar broke out in the surroundings. When the two streamers and with their imposing auras, the two streamers is. Dong. At the moment of the collision, it was as if the world was silent. Then, everyone was shocked to find that above the starry sky, a violent energy crazily erupted. That energy was like an erupting volcano, becoming gorgeous and colorful in the sky. As for the berserk energy, it swept out in an unparalleled manner. Like an invisible ripple, it quickly spread out. The 20 cultivators closest to it all let out a muffled groan, spat out a mouthful of blood, and retreated in a sorry state. Even the woman in the Cheongsam, who was a little far away, frowned slightly. The moment the aftershock spread, she had to retreat a distance under the protection of the steel plume. Bang! Bang! Two strange sounds resounded. Then, everyone was shocked to find that Shahuai and Guoyi were sent flying backwards in an extremely sorry state. And the divine artifacts in front of the two of them were actually shattered. In the opposite direction of the two flying backwards, the white-clothed young man stood in the air like a rock. His eyes were calm, like an ancient well without ripples. Whoosh! Shahuai and Guoyi, who were still struggling in the air, suddenly felt a chill in their chests. Then, their bodies fell down involuntarily. The two of them found that in front of their chests, there was a divine sword piercing through each of their chests. Thump! The two divine swords seemed to have the strength of 10,000 pounds, nailing the two of them to the ground. No matter how they struggled, they could not break free. The two divine swords were, of course, the Thunderfire sword and the Blood Immortal sword. Zhuowen's face was calm, but his heart was filled with excitement. Just now, when he chose to fight with Shahuai and Guoyi head-on, he silently mobilized the power of the Pangu sacred body. He wanted to see how powerful the Pangu sacred body was after it was promoted to 2 stars. In the end, what surprised Zhuowen was that the power of the Pangu sacred body was far beyond his expectations. Not only did it resist the desperate attacks of Shahuai and Guoyi, but it also shattered their divine artifacts. Zhuowen landed beside Shahuai and Guoyi. With a wave of his sleeve, he took off their spiritual rings. The remaining 20 practitioners who were besieging Zhuowen were too scared to move forward. More than 40 people had besieged him, and nearly half of them had been killed by this person. Furthermore, he had fought with his life on the line against Shahuai and Guoyi, shattering their divine weapons and defeating them. What kind of monstrous genius was this? If they still went against this person, they would be digging their own graves. Shahuai and Guoyi glared at each other, both shocked and angry. Do you know who the force behind us is? We are all from a Taoist force. Even in the Xian Mi heavenly territory, it is a powerful force. How about this? We were wrong before. Now, let's remove the stone tablet immediately. Then, we will write off the grudge between us, Shahuai said coldly. Guoyi looked at Zhuowen coldly. He knew that since the white-clothed young man in front of him knew about the heavenly law origin crystal, he must know something about the Xian Mi heavenly territory. He should know what a Taoist force represented. After knowing that they were from a Taoist force, they felt that the white-clothed young man in front of them should be afraid. After all, the white-clothed young man was indeed powerful, but he was only from the 8 heavens. How could he have any backing? If he killed them, he would completely offend the 2 Taoist forces, Po Valley and Sky Crane House. Although the 2 of them were only inner disciples in Po Valley and Sky Crane House, they were still the representatives of the 8 heavens. If they died in the 8 heavens, even Po Valley and Sky Crane House would not let it go. Chapter 2648. Fire Plume. However, we can help you settle this, Shahuai said calmly. He could feel the hostility in Zhuowen's eyes, so he threw out such conditions, hoping that Zhuowen would know the severity of the situation. Unfortunately, as soon as Shahuai finished speaking, Zhuowen slammed his palm on his forehead. Shahuai's eyes were wide open, and he died with remaining grievances. Guoyi looked at the dead Shahuai. His calm eyes were suddenly filled with panic and fear. This was the fear of death. He did not expect that the white-clothed young man in front of him would kill Shahuai without thinking about the consequences. Write it off. If it was before all of you made a move, I really wouldn't want to cause trouble. Unfortunately, all of you wanted to join forces to kill me and even turned my Wen Shui palace into a mess. Do you think that just writing it off will be enough? Zhuo Wen sneered. I will compensate you. Please spare me, Guoyi said hurriedly. Just use your lives as compensation. Zhuo Wen's right index finger and middle finger formed a sword and pointed at Guoyi's forehead. A powerful spiritual sense storm instantly ground Guoyi's soul to nothingness. The moment Shahuai and Guoyi died, the surroundings were silent. It was so quiet that it was terrifying. Among them, the 20 cultivators who had besieged Zhuowen were trembling and fell into a deathly silence. Come here. Zhuowen pointed at the 20 cultivators, and a powerful killing intent firmly locked onto them. The 20 cultivators felt bitter in their hearts. They knew that under the lock of this killing intent, they simply couldn't escape, unless they broke this killing intent. However, breaking this killing intent meant going against Zhuo Wen, and their end would most likely be the same as Shahuai and Guoyi. The 20 cultivators obediently came before Zhuowen. They lowered their heads and did not say a word. Swear an oath to the heavenly law and become my, Zhuowen's, slaves. Of course, I won't make you my slaves forever. You will be free after 100 years. Zhuowen said indifferently. He knew very well that these 20 people were all heavenly Tao masters. Cultivators who could prove their Tao were all geniuses, so it was inevitable that they would be proud and arrogant. If they were to become Zhuowen's permanent slaves, they would rather die than submit. Therefore, Zhuowen gave them a time limit, which was the same method he used to subdue Bloodscale. The 20 people looked at each other in dismay and hesitated. If you don't agree, then die. Zhuowen's gaze was sharp, and his killing intent surged out as if it was material. These 20 people naturally felt this terrifying killing intent, and their hearts trembled as they all swore the heavenly Tao oath. 100 years was too short for them. After swearing the heavenly oath, these 20 people all revealed bitter smiles. They came to the 8 heavens in high spirits, but they didn't expect to become someone else's slaves, and their master was actually someone from the 8 heavens. This made them feel even more humiliated, but between humiliation and life, they decisively chose the latter. Fortunately, they wouldn't be permanent servants. They would only be servants for 100 years, which made them feel relieved. After these 20 people swore the heavenly Tao oath, they all stood respectfully behind Zhuowen. Zhuowen didn't care about these 20 people anymore. The reason why he only made them slaves for 100 years was mainly to let these 20 people protect the Wen Snow Palace for 100 years. He could feel that there would be more and more cultivators coming from the Xian Mi heavenly domain. He always felt that the purpose of these cultivators was not only the seal of the Eldritch heavenly domain, but also other purposes. In addition, Zhuowen still had to go to the Spacetime Temple and Earth to find the origin of the mythological era. Mu Chunxue was in seclusion, so Zhuowen naturally couldn't leave the Wen Snow Palace without worry. These 20 people together were a considerable force. It should be more than enough to protect the Wen Snow Palace. You guys continue to use the stone tablet to test the Tao roots. If you find another Tao root and they are willing to follow you, you can take them away after 100 years, Zhuowen said to the 20 people behind him. When the 20 people heard this, they were all pleasantly surprised. Previously, with Shahuai and Guoyi around, even if the Tao root was chosen, it would probably be taken away by the 2 of them first. As for the 20 people, they probably could only drink the leftovers, or maybe not even the leftovers. But now that Shahuai and Guoyi were no longer around, the selection of the Tao root would naturally be a fair competition. This was a blessing in disguise for them. Hello, I'm Fire Plume from the Purple Red House. I'm also from the Xian Mi heavenly domain. The woman in the Cheongsam, who was originally standing not far away and watching coldly, brought the steel giant to Zhuowen's side and spoke in a rather polite manner. Zhuowen glanced at the woman in the Cheongsam, and then his gaze fell on the steel giant behind her. The woman in the Cheongsam, Fire Plume, didn't have a strong aura. She was probably at the peak of the Heavenly Tao Master, the same level as Shahuai and Guoyi. But the steel giant behind the woman in the Cheongsam was very different. Its aura was as vast and boundless as the ocean. Zhuowen knew that it was at least a Daoyuan master, or even a Hunyuan master. Of course, Zhuowen wasn't necessarily afraid of the steel giant. After all, his Pangu sacred body had advanced to the two-stars realm. Ordinary Daoyuan masters were no match for the Pangu sacred body, and Hunyuan master might not be able to kill him. Zhuowen, the domain lord of the great Brahma domain. Zhuowen nodded slightly and said. Fire Plume smiled and didn't mind Zhuowen's impolite attitude. She still smiled and said, Domain Lord Zhuo, you have extraordinary talent and monstrous strength. Your future is limitless. If you can go to the Xian Mi heavenly domain, you will definitely soar. Zhuowen nodded and said indifferently, What do you two want? If there is nothing else, I have other things to do. With what Shahuai and Guoyi had done before, Zhuowen didn't have a good impression of these people from the Xian Mi heavenly domain. The steel giant beside the woman in the Cheongsam did give him a sense of crisis, but Zhuowen wasn't afraid. If the steel giant attacked, it might not be able to stop Zhuowen. Moreover, Zhuowen also believed that the strength he had shown just now was enough to make the steel giant wary. It would certainly not attack rashly. Huoyu's brow furrowed slightly. She wasn't happy with Zhuowen's attitude, but it was clear that she was a shrewd person. It's like this, Domain Lord Zhuo. If you bring your junior sister with you to Xian Mi heavenly domain, our Purple Red House will welcome you with open arms. Chapter 2649. Zhuowen only nodded. He didn't really care about Fire Plume's words. No matter how good Fire Plume's self-restraint was, she was still a bit angry at Zhuowen's indifferent attitude. She said coldly, Domain Lord Zhuo, if I'm not here, you will most likely die in the heavenly moat. I think that if you really want to go to the Xian Mi heavenly domain, you should reconsider. Zhuowen looked coldly at Fire Plume and asked, I know that the heavenly moat is very dangerous. Since you can cross it to the 8 heavenly domains, I can naturally cross it to enter the Xian Mi heavenly domain. Do I have to rely on you to enter the Xian Mi heavenly domain? Fire Plume sneered, the heavenly moat is a true land of despair. If you don't have a flying ship specially designed for the heavenly moat, you are simply courting death. Someone like you doesn't know anything about the heavenly moat. I can guarantee that you will definitely die in the heavenly moat. Zhuowen frowned. He could tell from Fire Plume's words that there were certain conditions to cross the heavenly moat. Zhuowen turned his head and asked seriously, Can't ordinary flying divine tools do the trick? Just as Fire Plume said, he really didn't know anything about the heavenly moat. He saw that there were so many people in the Xian Mi heavenly domain, and most of them were heavenly Tao lords. He thought that the heavenly moat wouldn't be too dangerous for him. But now, it seemed that he had underestimated the heavenly moat. Haha. If you really choose an ordinary flying divine tool, then you are dead. Not long after entering the heavenly moat, the flying divine tool will completely collapse. Without it, there is a chance that second step Tao confirming experts will die in the heavenly moat. Fire Plume sneered. Zhuowen frowned and said, Please enlighten me, Miss Fire Plume. Fire Plume shook his head and said, You and I are not related. I have no obligation to tell you these things unless you and the girl beside you join Purple Red House. Then I will take you to Xian Mi heavenly region. Zhuowen shook his head, I won't join your Purple Red House. If you don't say it, I'm sure they already know. As he said that, Zhuowen pointed to the 20 cultivators behind him. These 20 people were also from the Xian Mi heavenly domain, so they definitely knew the method to enter and exit the heavenly chasm. Fire Plume's lips curled into a sly smile as he said, They're just from a small force. They came here with the help of Shahuai and Guoyi's spaceships. Don't think that you can use their spaceships just because you've obtained their spirit rings, because the control of the spaceships is controlled by the forces behind them. Once they discover that the representatives they sent have died, the corresponding spaceships will automatically be scrapped. If you don't believe me, You can try the spaceships in Shahuai and Guoyi's spirit rings. Zhuowen was stunned. Seeing that Fire Plume didn't seem to be lying to him, he took out Shahuai and Guoyi's spirit rings and scanned them with his divine sense. He found a lot of heavenly Dao origin crystals inside. Unfortunately, they were all low-grade heavenly Dao origin crystals. In addition, there were some divine herbs, but these divine herbs all contained Dao rhymes. Zhuowen suspected that these divine herbs were heavenly Dao origin divine herbs, materials used to refine heavenly Dao origin divine pills. Because Zhuowen had inherited the alchemy Dao insights of the Emperor Pill Fire, he was no stranger to many Dao origin divine herbs. He was familiar with the heavenly Dao origin divine herbs in Shahuai and Guoyi's spirit rings. Zhuowen knew that with these heavenly Dao origin divine herbs, he could use them to practice and raise his alchemy level to heavenly Dao origin divine pills. In addition, he did find 2 spaceships in Shahuai and Guoyi's spirit rings. These 2 spaceships were different from ordinary flight divine artifacts. He could feel a powerful thrust from these spaceships, especially when he got closer to the spaceships. This thrust became more and more obvious, as if it was trying to push him out. Taking out the 2 spaceships, Zhuowen's eyes were filled with surprise and doubt. That's an anti-gravity seal. Let me tell you, the biggest threat to nature's moat is the terrifying gravity that comes from its depths. The gravity is so strong that it's unimaginable. Any light that shines into nature's moat will be involuntarily sucked in by this gravity. This is also the main reason why nature's moat always looks so dark. Ordinary spaceships don't have anti-gravity seals. This means that after entering the natural chasm, it's very easy to be attracted by the terrifying gravity and fall into the endless depths of the natural chasm. You should understand now, right? Fire Plume pointed at the 2 spaceships that Zhuowen took out and said faintly. Zhuowen's eyes were solemn. If the natural chasm was really as terrifying as Fire Plume said, then wouldn't Crepe Myrtle Star be in trouble? Like him, Crepe Myrtle Star didn't know much about the natural chasm. If he used an ordinary spaceship to enter the natural chasm, he would be courting death. Thinking of this, Zhuowen sighed in his heart. He could only pray that Crepe Myrtle Star would be lucky. Moreover, he had also tested the 2 airships just now. It was just as Huoyu had said. No matter how he tried to stimulate the 2 airships with his spiritual sense, the 2 airships didn't react at all. There wasn't even a trace of Dao charm on the surface. However, the anti-gravity seal on the surface of the 2 spaceships was still there. What a complicated pattern! Zhuowen looked at the anti-gravity seal pattern on the surface of the spaceships and couldn't help but sigh. The anti-gravity seal is extremely complicated. It requires at least a heavenly fate realm formation Dao master to be able to set it up, Fire Plume said faintly. Zhuowen's eyes flickered as he calmly put the 2 spaceships into his spirit ring. Although the 2 spaceships were scrapped, the anti-gravity seal on them was very valuable for research. If he was asked to set up the anti-gravity seal out of thin air, it would be impossible for him to do it. However, Zhuowen felt that he might be able to do it if he followed the pattern of the anti-gravity restriction and copied it. Although he was only a level 9 formation Dao master, his divine sense was getting stronger with the help of the Pangu banner. Even a heavenly fate realm formation Dao master didn't have a divine sense as strong as Zhuowen's. If he used his divine sense to forcibly restore the anti-gravity seal, Zhuowen believed that he could do it. However, he might suffer a lot of backlash. After all, if a formation Dao master forcibly set up a formation Dao master that was beyond their level, it would cause a lot of damage to their divine sense. However, Zhuowen's divine sense was extremely strong, so he didn't have to worry about this. Therefore, if you want to go to the Xian Mi heavenly domain, it's best for you to choose us. Otherwise, the chances of you dying in the heavenly moat are too high. I think you are a smart person. Fire Plume was still talking, but unfortunately, she was interrupted by Zhuowen. Are you done? If there's nothing else, please leave. Fire Plume was stunned. Looking at the calm white-clothed youth in front of her, she couldn't help but get angry. What did this guy take her kindness for? He was too hateful. However, before Fire Plume could do anything, she was suppressed by the steel giant. We're fine. We'll take our leave first. The steel giant looked at Zhuoan indifferently and left the Wen Snow Palace with Fire Plume. Steel Plume, what are you doing? Are you afraid of that kid? After leaving the Wen Snow Palace, Fire Plume broke free from the steel giant and said angrily, "We don't have any conflict with this person. There's no need to get into a conflict with him. Moreover, miss, don't you find it strange? Since this person is from the 8 heavenly domains, why is he so powerful and terrifying? And why does he know about the heavenly path origin crystal?" Steel Plume said indifferently. Chapter 2650. Processing Steel Plume, what do you mean? Fire Plume thought of something and asked. The energy in the starry sky of the 8 heavens is so poor. It's already not easy to cultivate to the virtual sky world. I've checked this boy. His real age is definitely not more than 500 years old. He's so young, but he already has the cultivation of the 2 extremes of life and death. He also has the strength to kill the Heavenly Tao Master and 3 Heavenly Tao Divine Tools. Steel Plume paused and looked at Fire Plume. He knew that Fire Plume already knew what he meant. This boy has a big secret. Maybe he has something to do with the origin of the mythological era. Fire Plume narrowed his eyes and said with some horror. They didn't come to the 8 heavens mainly for the gap in the primitive heavenly realm. Although the gap in the primitive heavenly realm was big, it wasn't enough for Shen-Mi heavenly realm to send so many strong cultivators. They were only a small part of it. In the following days, more cultivators would come from Shen-Mi heavenly realm. Their main purpose was to come here because of the information provided by Shui Wuhan. The origin of the mythological era was hidden in the 8 heavens. Although they didn't know what was in the origin, they were sure that the things in the origin would definitely not be bad. It was enough to make many cultivators go crazy. In the mythological era, it was a real gathering of gods and powerful cultivators. It was an era where heroes rose together and geniuses filled the sky. In the mythological era, there were countless legends of powerful cultivators. The 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors, Xingtian Zhantian, Quafu chasing the sun, Huyi shooting the 9 suns and so on. These powerful cultivators were real, but they were later annihilated in the long river of time. They either died, lived in seclusion, or disappeared without a trace. Until the end of the mythological era, when the primitive heavenly realm and Shen-Mi heavenly realm entered the era of the human race and the witch race, which was the era Zhuoan lived in. In fact, there was a gap in civilization between the mythological era and the Shen-Mi heavenly realm. Whether it was the primitive heavenly realm or Shen-Mi heavenly realm, there was no record of what happened after the mythological era ended. It could be said that the end of the mythological era came suddenly. Many powerful beings seemed to have disappeared at that moment, no longer appearing in front of everyone's eyes. Although the end of the mythological era was inexplicable, many cultivators knew that the things left behind from the mythological era were absolutely priceless treasures. They were treasures that made many cultivators go crazy. Since the origin of the mythological era was in one of the 8 heavens, and the 8 heavens had produced such an abnormal Zhuoan, Fire Plume and Steel Plume could not help but suspect that this person had something to do with the origin of Lusterless. There's a high chance that this person is related to the land of origin, but he's very strong. If we fight him head-on, we won't be able to get away with it, Fire Plume said worriedly. After witnessing Zhuoan not only survive the joint attacks of over 40 heavenly Tao masters, but he'd even turned the tables and killed 20 of them. Moreover, he'd even killed Shahuai and Guiyi who'd led the attack. The Fire Plume was extremely fearful of Zhuoan and didn't want to enter into conflict with him. We don't have to enter into a conflict with this person. We just have to follow him. Didn't the sect master give you a concealment talisman? That's a heavenly fate talisman. As long as we use that talisman, even the heavenly fate master might not be able to detect us, let alone this person, Steel Plume said. Fire Plume took out 2 talismans from his spirit ring and gave one to Steel Plume. Strangely, when the 2 of them put the talismans on their bodies, they actually merged with the surrounding starry sky. Even their auras were exactly the same as the starry sky. If a cultivator used his divine sense to scan the starry sky where the 2 of them were, he wouldn't think that the 2 of them were actually there. Instead, he'd think that it was just a starry sky. The two of them who used the talismans silently hid on an uninhabited meteorite tens of thousands of miles away from the Wen Snow Palace. Within the Wen Snow Palace, after Zhuowen instructed those 20 people to continue testing the stone steles, he instructed them to protect the Wen Snow Palace while he was away. The 20 of them naturally didn't dare to refuse. After all, they were now Zhuowen's servants. Although it was only for 100 years, if Zhuowen wanted them dead, he could do so with a single thought. They would definitely not dare disobey Zhuowen's orders. After he finished instructing them, Zhuowen gazed seriously at Tong Chimei, who stood by his side, and said, "Chimei, since you possess an Earth-rank ancestral Dao root, then going to the Xianmi heavenly region is actually the best choice. Why didn't you agree just now?" Tong Chimei said seriously as well, "I don't know anything about the Xianmi heavenly region. No matter if it was Shehuai, Guoyi, or Fireplume, they didn't respect my choice when they recruited me. So, I didn't make a choice at that time." Zhuowen nodded. In terms of choice, he agreed with Tong Chimei. With Tong Chimei's natural talent, it would be extremely easy for her to join a Dao Palace level power in the Xianmi heavenly region. No matter if it was Shehuai or Guoyi, the powers standing behind them were only Dao sects, so they naturally had to respect a genius like Tong Chimei. Unfortunately, Shehuai and Guoyi were both cultivators of the Xianmi heavenly domain and did not have much respect for Tong Chimei. This also caused Tong Chimei to have a bad impression of Shehuai and Guoyi's invitation. After all, Tong Chimei was practically an amateur when it came to the matters of the Xianmi heavenly region, and all the cultivators from the Xianmi heavenly region were definitely lofty experts in her heart. So long as Shehuai and Guoyi were sufficiently respectful to Tong Chimei and didn't fight over her and treat her like an item, then perhaps Tong Chimei would really be tempted. "I'm going out for a period of time. These 20 people will stay in the Wen Snow Palace to protect all of you. The next period of time won't be too peaceful, so all of you should pay attention. If Chen Shui comes out of her closed-door cultivation, then all of you should tell her about it." After Zhuowen instructed Magatama and Yuezu, he went to inform Bloodscale and the green-haired corpse. These two fellows relied on his identity as Zhuowen to occupy the best place in the Wen Snow Palace, even showing off their strength. When Zhuowen found the two of them, he found that the two of them were acting like masters, ordering the servants of the Wen Snow Palace around, completely ignoring the fact that they were living under someone else's roof. "Yo, little brat, you've finally come out of your closed-door cultivation." The green-haired mummy was sitting cross-legged, enjoying the service of a frightened servant. When he saw Zhuowen come in, he said slowly. Bloodscale quickly stood up and respectfully smiled at Zhuowen. Just now, Zhuowen had caused such a large commotion in the quest hall, so Bloodscale and the green-haired corpse had naturally seen it. Chapter 2651. Huaxia Continent. After all, Xuelin had used the high-grade Heaven's Path origin crystal that Zhuowen had given him. Although he had recovered to the Heaven's Pathmaster realm and was much stronger than ordinary Heaven's Pathmasters, Xuelin was still a Heaven's Pathmaster. However, Bloodscale was besieged by more than 40 Heavenly Pathmasters, 2 of whom were peak Heavenly Pathmasters. Bloodscale naturally could not defeat them. At most, he would not be defeated. However, Zhuowen easily defeated the besiegement of more than 40 Heavenly Pathmasters. This made Bloodscale realize that Zhuowen's strength had increased greatly after coming out of seclusion. Zhuowen also felt that Bloodscale's attitude towards him had changed significantly. However, he did not care. Instead, he looked at the green-haired mummy and said, "Since I've come out of seclusion, shouldn't we go?" The green-haired mummy nodded and said, "Since you know the planet of origin, that's great. You lead the way." Zhuowen took out the spacetime roulette and left the Wen Snow Palace with the green-haired mummy and Bloodscale. Not long after Zhuowen left the Wen Snow Palace, Fireplume and Steelplume also took out their flying divine artifacts and followed quietly behind him on a remote meteorite not far from the Wen Snow Palace. The two of them used concealment talismans, and their auras were completely integrated with the starry sky. Even though Zhuowen's divine sense was very powerful, he did not notice that the two of them were secretly following him. However, the green-haired mummy, who was sitting cross-legged on the deck, glanced behind him and sneered. However, the green-haired mummy did not say anything. Instead, it sat cross-legged and closed its eyes, silently absorbing the starry sky energy around it. This time, Zhuowen was controlling it himself. Its speed was much faster than usual, almost as fast as lightning. However, Zhuowen was still somewhat dissatisfied with the space-time roulette's fastest speed. If only I could get the complete space-time roulette, Zhuowen muttered to himself. The space-time roulette that he had obtained was not complete. Instead, it had been refined using the core components of the space-time roulette. There was a huge difference between it and the real space-time roulette. If it was a complete space-time roulette, Zhuowen believed that the speed would definitely be much faster than it was now. The space-time law inside would also be more complete. Speaking of which, the space-time roulette belonged to the space-time master. Zhuowen wondered if the space-time temple had any other flying artifacts similar to the space-time roulette. If there was, it would definitely be good news for Zhuowen. Zhuowen planned to use the space-time key to enter the space-time temple after dealing with the origin lands on Earth. A month later, Zhuowen looked at the blue planet in the distance and said, "I think the origin of the mythological era is this planet. It's called Earth, and it's also my hometown." The green-haired mummy narrowed its eyes and looked at Earth in the distance. Its gaze became cautious as it said, "You're right. I do feel an ancient aura on this planet. The age of this aura is definitely far beyond what you and I can imagine. Maybe this planet really is hiding the origin of the mythological era." With that, the green-haired mummy looked at Zhuowen seriously and said, "Is this planet really your hometown? And why are you so sure that this planet is the origin of the mythological era?" "Because on this planet, there are also myths about Pangu opening the sky, Quafu chasing the sun, Huyi shooting the sun, and so on. Although these myths are different from the legends of the mythological era in this starry sky, the difference is not big. That's why I have such a guess," Zhuowen said. "No wonder. So that's how it is. No wonder the Pangu flag chose you. Maybe it has something to do with this planet." The green-haired mummy whispered as it looked at Zhuowen from head to toe, as if it was trying to get to know Zhuowen all over again. "This planet is still managed by the cultivators." As they approached Earth, the green-haired mummy looked indifferently at an invisible continent hidden around Earth and said casually, "Yes, that's the Huaxia continent, a companion of Earth. Everyone in the Huaxia continent is a cultivator, while Earth is inhabited by mortals. How do you plan to find the land of origin?" Zhuowen looked at the green-haired mummy and asked. "This jade pillar is the key to opening the land of origin. This planet may look ordinary on the surface, but I can see that there's some kind of formation hidden within this planet. This formation is naturally formed, and its level is very high. Even if it's me, I might die if I casually touch this formation. However, with this key, I think we should be able to unlock the formation," said the green-haired corpse. "What's your purpose in entering the land of origin?" Zhuowen's eyes flickered as he suddenly asked. The green-haired mummy said indifferently, "My purpose is to recover my strength. There are many things I need in the land of origin, and there are also many good things. Don't worry, you have the Pangu flag, so I won't attack you. We're just going to take what we need in the land of origin." Zhuowen nodded and said nothing. Ever since he obtained the Pangu flag, the green-haired mummy had no hostility toward him. Instead, it was full of fear. He knew that the Pangu flag must be very restrained against the green-haired mummy and would not attack him easily. Whoosh! Whoosh! Zhuowen looked at the streaks of sword light and realized that they were all cultivators flying on their swords. He did not feel surprised. When he first came to Earth with Taiqing, he was also blocked by these cultivators flying on swords. He remembered that these sword cultivators were from Mount Buzhou, which should be the largest force in the Huaxia continent. Zhuowen also had some recollection of the sect master of Mount Buzhou. His name should be Yuzi. A bunch of trash. "Master, do you want me to help you destroy them?" Bloodscale looked at the group of sword cultivators blocking their way with disdain. These sword cultivators were all only in the celestial realm. Even the white-haired old man at the front of the group was only in the true immortal realm. Such a cultivation was indeed no different from an ant in the eyes of Zhuowen and the others. The white-haired old man at the front of the group was Uze, the sect master of Mount Buzhou. He sensed an unfamiliar force approaching Earth and immediately gathered the elites of Mount Buzhou to rush out of the continent to check it out. However, Uze's heart sank when he found that he could not see through the aura of the three people on the spacetime roulette in front of him and that they gave him an extremely strong sense of oppression. Uze also found that the young man in white standing at the front of the spacetime roulette gave him a sense of déjà vu, as if he had seen him somewhere before. Zhuowen glanced at Bloodscale indifferently. The latter smiled awkwardly and did not dare to interrupt anymore. Zhuowen walked out of the spacetime roulette and cupped his hands at Uze. Sect Master Yu, long time no see. How have you been? Chapter 2652. Returning to Earth, your little brother Zhuowen? Uze asked tentatively. Zhuowen smiled and said, Sect Master Yu has good eyesight. Back then, Taiching brought me here to settle some of the grudges from my previous life. I still have to thank Sect Master Yu. Little brother Zhuo's talent is indeed outstanding. It's only been a few hundred years, but I can't even compare to you anymore. Domain Lord Taiching really has good eyes. Uze's face was full of emotion. He remembered that a few hundred years ago, Zhuowen was only in the heaven god realm. Now, he actually couldn't see through this child's cultivation. He knew that Zhuowen had probably advanced to the virtual sky world. Of course, if Uze knew that Zhuowen was now in the life and death realm and had even killed the heavenly Tao Master, he would probably be so shocked that his teeth would fall out. Zhuowen smiled and didn't explain that he had nothing to do with Taiching now. Logically speaking, Zhuowen's story should have spread far and wide in the Huaxia heaven region. Uze probably didn't know about it because Earth was too remote and Uze was too weak, so he didn't know about it. May I know why little brother Zhuo came here this time? Uze asked politely. Zhuowen said, Sect Master Yu, we might have to borrow Earth this time. We have some things to do. Uze frowned and hesitated for a moment. Little brother Zhuo, you know that there's a difference between mortals and immortals. If you enter Earth, you might be devoured by Earth's laws of heaven and earth. I'm afraid it's not appropriate. As soon as Uze finished speaking, Xuelin coldly harumphed, and an invisible sound wave spread out. Uze's expression changed slightly, and he grunted as he retreated. The row of sword cultivators behind Uze was even worse off. They staggered from side to side, their eyes filled with fear as they looked at Xuelin in disbelief. It was just a cold snort, yet it was already so powerful. Just how powerful was this person? Moreover, the blood-red clothed man was standing behind Zhuowen and seemed to be following Zhuowen's lead. Didn't that mean that Zhuowen was even more terrifying than the blood-red clothed man? What can the laws of heaven and earth of a mere planet do to us? I say, you'd better keep your mouth shut. Letting us in is the best choice, otherwise. Before Bloodscale could finish speaking, he saw Zhuowen turn around and look at him coldly. Bloodscale couldn't say anything else. He hurriedly said, Master, I'm just anxious. Don't do it again, Zhuowen said calmly. Bloodscale nodded submissively. His imposing manner disappeared without a trace, and he followed behind Zhuowen like an obedient little lamb. The more Bloodscale behaved like this, the more Uze feared Zhuowen. The imposing manner released by Bloodscale just now was definitely not an ordinary virtual sky world. Even in the virtual sky world, he was still an expert among experts. However, such a powerful existence was actually so tame in front of Zhuowen. Uze really didn't know how strong Zhuowen was. Little brother Zhuo, to be honest, the laws of heaven and earth of our earth are very strange. Generally speaking, after a cultivator enters the true immortal realm, the backlash and suppression from an ordinary planet can be completely offset by the cultivator's cultivation level. However, the laws of heaven and earth are very different. The stronger the cultivator, the stronger the suppression. Even virtual sky-world cultivators would be seriously injured by the terrifying backlash after entering Earth. In the end, they wouldn't dare to stay on Earth for long. This old man isn't lying to you at all, Yuzi hurriedly explained. Zhuowen's gaze sharpened. If what Yuzi said was true, then Earth was indeed different from ordinary planets. At that time, he only sent a clone to Earth, so he didn't feel the backlash from the powerful laws of heaven and Earth. At that time, he also didn't care too much about it. Now that he knew Earth was not ordinary, he naturally thought a lot more than before. Sect Master Yu, we didn't come here to cause trouble. We really have important things to deal with. Even if you say so, we still plan to enter Earth and give it a try. But rest assured, Sect Master Yu, we won't take the initiative to cause trouble. Zhuowen cupped his fists and said sincerely to Yuzi. Yuzi glanced at Bloodscale and the green-haired corpse behind Zhuowen and felt bitter in his heart. He knew that even if he refused, he probably wouldn't be able to stop them. After all, Zhuowen and the other two were too strong. If he refused, he would definitely offend Zhuowen. If he agreed, he would instead buy a favor from them. Sect Master Yu, this is a small token of appreciation. Please don't refuse. Seeing Yuzi hesitate, Zhuowen took out a jade bottle and handed it to Yuzi. Yuzi frowned and opened the bottle. His pupils suddenly shrank because he found that the jade bottle was actually filled with void sky pills. Moreover, there were 10 of them. Void sky pills were high-grade medicinal pills that could help peak-stage true god cultivators form their void sky bridge and advance to the virtual sky world. Yuzi had been stuck at peak-stage true god for a long time. As long as he had these void sky pills, he would definitely advance to the virtual sky world. It could be said that Zhuowen's void sky pills were a temptation he couldn't refuse. Putting away the jade bottle, Yuzi nodded and said, "Little brother Zhuo, as long as you don't cause trouble on Earth, you can enter." "Thank you, Sect Master Yu." Zhuowen cupped his fists with a smile and immediately put away the space-time roulette. He took Bloodscale and the green-haired corpse and rushed into Earth. Watching Bloodscale and the green-haired corpse leave, Yuzi sighed softly. At the same time, there was a hint of excitement in his eyes. After obtaining these void sky pills, he planned to go into closed-door meditation to break through to the virtual sky world after returning. "Sect Master, are we just going to let them in?" A middle-aged man came to Yuzi's side and asked somewhat unwillingly. Yuzi shook his head and said, "Even if we stop them, what's the point? With their strength, killing us would be as easy as squashing ants. What's the point of us stopping them? When the time comes, we'll only sacrifice ourselves for nothing. It's better to buy a favor from them." The middle-aged man fell silent. Yuzi was right. Zhuo Wen and the others were too powerful. Xuelin had only snorted coldly, and they had already lost their footing. If they were to fight, they wouldn't even be able to touch a finger of Xuelin. After Yuzi and the others returned to the Huaxia continent, two figures slowly approached tens of thousands of miles away from Earth. These two figures almost merged with the starry sky. It was impossible to tell which was the figure and which was the starry sky. "Miss, they've entered that planet. Could it be that it's not an ordinary planet?" Steel Plume secretly said. Fire Plume, who was wearing a cheongsam, frowned slightly as she stared at the blue planet in the distance and said, "No matter how I look at it, this planet looks ordinary. Why would they enter an ordinary planet with life? Let's go in and take a look," Steel Plume said. Fire Plume pondered for a moment and nodded. The two of them quietly entered Earth. Chapter 2653. Kunlun Jade Pillar. The moment Zhuowen and the others entered Earth, their expressions changed. Zhuowen could clearly feel that there was a powerful force on the surface of Earth's atmosphere that was squeezing his body, as if it was trying to push him away and prevent him from getting close. Under this pressure, Zhuowen's blood began to boil involuntarily. It was as if the blood in his body would burst out if he did not control it well. Not only Zhuowen, but Bloodscale and the green-haired mummy also sensed the abnormality. Their expressions did not look good as they tried their best to resist this terrifying pressure. Moreover, Zhuowen realized that the green-haired mummy, who was the strongest among them, was in the most difficult situation. Zhuowen guessed that this pressure would become stronger as one's strength increased. Thinking of this, Zhuowen revealed a look of understanding. He hurriedly retracted his aura and hid it within his body, suppressing his strength to below the heavenly god level. Then, Zhuowen was pleasantly surprised to find that the pressure around him had weakened a lot. My guess was right, Zhuowen muttered softly. Then, he told Bloodscale and the green-haired mummy the method. The two of them followed Zhuowen's instructions and found that the pressure around them had indeed weakened a lot. Isn't this planet too strange? Why is the law of heaven and earth so powerful? After suppressing his strength, Xuelin muttered to himself in fear. The green-haired mummy's eyes shone brightly. He knew that the more extraordinary this planet was, the more likely it was that the land of origin was hidden on this planet. Green Hat, is the land of origin that you mentioned hidden on this planet? Zhuowen looked at the green-haired mummy and asked. The green-haired mummy's eyes flickered as he took out the jade pillar he had obtained from the Seuss shrine. The complicated patterns on the surface of the jade pillar were even clearer now, emitting a white light in the void. That's right. Only the land of origin can cause such a reaction from the jade pillar. It's just that after so many years of evolution, so much has changed. The green-haired mummy frowned slightly. Although they knew that the land of origin was on this planet, they didn't know the specific location. If they wanted to find the entrance to the land of origin, it would be quite troublesome. In the blink of an eye, the jade pillar in the green-haired corpse's hand trembled slightly, and the mysterious patterns on its surface fell off, connecting into a complicated pattern line that swept toward the bottom of the atmosphere. These lines were extremely fine, invisible to the naked eye of mortals. Ordinary cultivators would also have a hard time detecting them. It was also because Zhuowen's divine soul was strong enough that he was able to use his divine sense to capture this line. Apparently, Bloody Scale and the green-haired mummy had noticed the pattern as well. The three of them looked at each other and tacitly followed the pattern. The pattern line passed through the atmosphere, the blue sea, and entered the continent. After passing through several large continents, it entered the easternmost part of the continent. Zhuowen looked at the place where the pattern line passed through and narrowed his eyes. Wasn't this the country where he was from in his previous life, Huaxia? Speaking of which, the legend of Pangu splitting open the sky was indeed a legend in Huaxia. In other words, the entrance to the land of origin should be within Huaxia's territory. The Dongjiang province was the most developed province in the eastern coastal area of Huaxia. It had a developed economy and a large population. Among them, Jinling City was the largest city in the Dongjiang province. It was one of the largest cities in the entire country. At this moment, many people were gathered on the top floor of a towering building in Jinling City. These men and women were dressed in gorgeous clothes and spoke elegantly. They were obviously the upper class of Jinling City. The top floor was an open-air platform with complete facilities. There was even a swimming pool on the top floor. From the swimming pool, one could overlook the entire Jinling City. However, these upper-class people were all gathered under a glass ceiling. In front of them was an old man standing straight on the stage. On the stage, there was a rod-shaped object covered by a red cloth. The attention of the men and women below was attracted by the rod-shaped object covered by the red cloth. The old man's eyes were solemn. He slowly walked to the rod-shaped object and lifted the red cloth. Immediately, a somewhat dazzling jade-colored light flickered. Immediately, it gradually disappeared, revealing a jade pillar. The surface of the jade pillar was crisscrossed with extremely complicated patterns. It also revealed an ancient and vicissitude aura. This jade pillar was obviously an extraordinary object, especially the flickering jade light just now. The moment it shone on the crowd, they only felt warm and full of energy. Is this the Kunlun jade pillar? I've heard of the legend of this Kunlun jade pillar. I thought it was just a baseless rumor, but now that I've seen it, it's actually true. This Kunlun jade pillar is too miraculous. When the jade-colored light shone on my body, I realized that my pneumonia was much better. It really has the miraculous effect of curing all kinds of diseases. The crowd below discussed animatedly and looked at the jade pillar displayed on the stage with more fervent and fanatical gazes. The old man coughed dryly and pointed to the jade pillar. Seeing this jade pillar, everyone knows that this jade pillar is the Kunlun jade pillar. A year ago, there was a sudden change in Mount Kunlun. More than 10 rays of light swept out, and according to the description of the investigators, these rays of light were the Kunlun jade pillar. The Kunlun jade pillar has been obtained by many people. Those who have obtained the Kunlun jade pillar have all recovered from all sorts of illnesses. Even old people in their 70s are full of vigor after being nourished by the Kunlun jade pillar. Everyone should know about the effects of the Kunlun jade pillar from the rumors. This is one of the Kunlun jade pillars. The old chairman of the Realm Knight Group accidentally found it in an antique market. It was later confirmed to be the Kunlun jade pillar that has been rumored recently. After the old man finished speaking, his following words became much softer. They had heard of the Realm Knight Group for a long time. It was the largest group in Jinling City. It was said to have a deep background and had an unusual relationship with the General Secretary of the Dongjiang province. Even the mayor of Jinling City was polite to the old chairman of the Realm Knight Group. It was obvious that the old chairman of the Realm Knight Group was not simple. I wonder why old Chairman Chen took out the Kunlun jade pillar and summoned us, an enchanting woman below the stage asked in surprise. The old man said faintly, everyone here is a high-ranking person in Jinling City. Old Chen intends to rent the Kunlun jade pillar to all of you so that you can use it in turns for 3 days. As soon as he said that, an uproar broke out. Although it was only for 3 days, the Kunlun jade pillar's effects were extremely heaven-defying. Even 3 days was enough to expel all the diseases in their bodies. It could even strengthen their bodies and make them energetic. Chapter 2654 The origin of the jade pillar. As for snatching the Kunlun jade pillar, they had never thought about it. The Realm Knight Group was the largest group in Jinling City, and it controlled the underground forces of Jinling City. It was a behemoth that mingled with both the underworld and the underworld. In addition, Elder Chen had the support of the Dong Province's General Secretary. He could cover the sky with one hand in Jinling City. Who would dare to snatch the Kunlun jade pillar from such a terrifying person? If anyone dared to do such a thing, they would not live to see the next day. After all, the Realm Knight Group was too powerful, and it was almost a monopoly. Elder Chen is willing to rent the Kunlun jade pillar to us. It shouldn't be without reason, right? A man with big framed glasses asked calmly. The old man smiled and said, of course. In fact, the Realm Knight Group plans to take over the huge wasteland in the north of Jinling City and build a business circle that belongs to the Realm Knight Group. However, the mayor of Jinling City has been obstructing them, so Elder Chen needs your help. Everyone's expression changed slightly. They all knew about the wasteland in the north of Jinling City. It was said that it was a big project approved by the country, but it became a wasteland because of some delay. The wasteland was very large, at least hundreds of thousands of square meters. Because it was approved by the country, it was technically the country's. Without the country's permission, no one dared to touch it. The Realm Knight Group was bold enough to have ideas about the wasteland. However, many people knew the inside story. They knew that the wasteland had been abandoned by the country, but the mayor of Jinling City was more old-fashioned. Without the approval of the higher-ups, the mayor would not give the wasteland to developers. Everyone, I think it's obvious that a wasteland is better than the Kunlun jade pillar. If you don't agree, then pretend I didn't say anything, the old man said calmly. The originally quiet underground began to clamor. In the end, they all agreed to help when fighting for the wasteland. The old man revealed a satisfied expression when he saw that everyone had agreed. Soon after, just as he was about to pick up the jade pillar, he actually grabbed empty air. The old man's pupils shrank. He quickly looked over and found that not far to his left, a young man in white had appeared without him noticing. Moreover, the young man in white was wearing an ancient white robe. He held the Kunlun jade pillar in his hand and was constantly studying it. His face was full of surprise. There are actually jade pillars on Earth. But why is this jade pillar so much thinner than the one in Green Hat's hand? It seems to be only 1/10 of the size of that jade pillar. The white-clothed young man muttered to himself as he casually threw the jade pillar into his spirit ring. Seeing the Kunlun jade pillar disappear before their eyes, the old man and everyone below were shocked. "Who are you? Where's the Kunlun jade pillar?" The old man was the first to react. He secretly pressed a button hidden in his pocket. Then, from the secret door behind him, more than 10 burly men in black suits rushed out. The bodyguards took out their pistols one after another and pointed their pitch-black muzzles at the young man in white. The white-clothed youth was none other than Zhuowen. He had arrived here by following the lines. The green-furred mummy and bloodscale were standing behind Zhuowen. However, the two of them had already used a concealment technique to conceal themselves. Ordinary people wouldn't be able to see them. Kunlun Jade Pillar? You named this thing the Kunlun Jade Pillar. Could it be that this thing has something to do with Kunlun Mountain? Zhuowen's expression was calm. He turned a blind eye to the pistols in the hands of the bodyguards. Fire. The old man regained his composure. He didn't want to talk nonsense with Zhuowen and immediately gave the order. Rather dense gunshots rang out. The people below had already retreated far away. They looked over in horror. They didn't expect the old man to be so decisive and shoot immediately. This was going to kill someone. But then, an incredible scene appeared before their eyes. They saw the white-clothed young man standing in the same place, letting the bullets hit his body. His expression didn't change at all. What shocked them even more was that these bullets were blocked when they fell within a foot of the white-clothed young man. They saw that there seemed to be an invisible barrier around the white-clothed young man. When the bullets fell on the invisible barrier, dense ripples and fluctuations splashed out. Under the white-clothed young man's feet, many bullets were scattered on the ground. These were all bullets that were blocked by the invisible barrier. How is this possible? Is he still human? He can't be killed by the pistols. Everyone was trembling in fear. Compared to the old man's order to shoot, they were now even more afraid. Think about it, a person who couldn't even be killed by a pistol was simply a monster. It was something that couldn't be explained by common sense. This was what scared them the most. The old man was also shocked. The dozen or so bodyguards standing behind the old man were also dumbfounded. Only after they had emptied the bullets in their pistols did they realize that the white-clothed youth was still standing in the same place, completely unharmed. You. What are you? The old man took a few steps back. Cold sweat dripped down his forehead as he said in disbelief. Zhuowen impatiently waved his hand. The old man's body involuntarily flew toward Zhuowen. In the end, Zhuowen grabbed his collar with one hand and lifted him into the air. Let go of our boss. The bodyguards shouted and quickly changed the magazine, intending to shoot at Zhuowen again. Unfortunately, Zhuowen didn't intend to continue the stalemate with these bodyguards. With a flick of his finger, the bodyguards were all involuntarily sent flying. They smashed the glass door behind them and fainted on the spot. All of you stay here. Otherwise, don't blame me for being impolite. The upper echelons who were hiding originally planned to sneak away. Unfortunately, Zhuowen's words made them all shrink back. They trembled as they looked at Zhuowen. Old man, you just said that it was the Kunlun Jade Pillar. Could it be related to the Kunlun Mountain? Zhuowen no longer paid attention to those upper echelons. Instead, he indifferently looked at the trembling old man in his hand and asked. The old man was already scared by Zhuowen's methods. He immediately confessed the origin of the Kunlun Jade Pillar. It turned out that the Kunlun Jade Pillar was shot out from the Kunlun Mountain a year ago. It was said that there were a total of 15 Kunlun Jade Pillars from the Kunlun Mountain. Each pillar was different in size. However, its heaven-defying effect slowly spread among the upper echelons of China. Many upper echelons were full of desire for the Kunlun Jade Pillar. According to the rumors, the Kunlun Jade Pillar could cure all kinds of diseases. It even had the miraculous effect of bringing the dead back to life. Kunlun Mountain. Chapter 2655. Old Zhong Kunlun Mountain was known as the #1 sacred mountain in Huaxia. The mountain range started from the east of the Pamir Plateau in the west, traversed between Xinjiang and Tibet, and extended all the way to Qinghai. Zhuowen didn't expect the Kunlun jade pillar to appear in Kunlun Mountain. Didn't that mean that the place of origin that they had been searching for was also in Kunlun Mountain? Do you know anything about the other Kunlun jade pillars? Zhuowen asked the old man. He had a feeling that the Kunlun jade pillar was definitely a key item. He planned to collect it. The old man smiled bitterly and shook his head. I'm not too sure about the Kunlun jade pillar, but old Chen from the Realm Knight group has been collecting them. He should know more than me. Then bring me there. Zhuowen said calmly. Immortal, are you going to go there just like that? The old man looked at Zhuowen's outfit and asked cautiously. In the presidential suite of a 5-star hotel in Jinling City, Zhuowen stood in front of the full-length mirror and looked at the t-shirt and jeans he was wearing. His eyes were filled with nostalgia. Strictly speaking, Earth was Zhuowen's true hometown. His feelings for Earth were much deeper than those for the heavenly armor planet. Now that he was wearing clothes from Earth again, Zhuowen felt as if a lifetime had passed. Brat, what are you doing? There's a connection between the jade pillars. We should be able to find it by following the connection. Are you really going to ask a mortal? The green-haired mummy appeared in the room and looked at Zhuowen's modern clothes in annoyance. Zhuowen looked at the mummy indifferently and said, When I found the Kunlun jade pillar, I used my divine sense to scan the entire Huaxia. I only found 13 Kunlun jade pillars in Huaxia. The old man said that there are 15 Kunlun jade pillars in total. Including the one I have, there's still one missing. The clue to that pillar is broken. Perhaps I can get some information from old Chen. At this point, Zhuowen glanced at the green-haired mummy and continued, You and Bloodscale have been to Kunlun Mountain, right? Did you find anything? The green-haired mummy said with a serious look, We have found the hidden entrance of Mount Kunlun. However, we need 2 jade pillars. The jade pillars are the keys. One is useless. Your guess is correct. The 15 Kunlun jade pillars should be another jade pillar that has been split into 15 parts. If we want to open the entrance to Kunlun Mountain, we need to gather all 15 Kunlun jade pillars. But how are you so sure that old Chen knows about the last Kunlun jade pillar? The green-haired mummy asked doubtfully. Zhuowen smiled faintly and said, Since old Chen is willing to rent the Kunlun jade pillar to others and isn't afraid of it being snatched away, he clearly has some confidence. And this confidence, in my opinion, means that this old man still has another Kunlun jade pillar. However, I didn't find a second Kunlun jade pillar in Jinling City. Clearly, this old man is very cunning. He must have hidden the last Kunlun jade pillar in a very secretive place. The green-haired mummy nodded. He felt that Zhuowen's speculation was reasonable. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door, followed by a respectful voice. Mr. Zhuo, are you done changing? If you are, this little one will bring you to see old Chen. Zhuowen opened the door. Outside the door was the old man that Zhuowen had grabbed by the collar on the balcony earlier. This old man's name is Zhongzhan. He runs a textile business in Jinling City. His assets are over 100 million, and he can be considered as an upper-class person in Jinling City. However, this Zhongzhan loves to hug someone's thigh. Even if he became an upper-class person, this Zhongzhan was willing to run errands for old Chen in order to hug his thigh. Now that Zhongzhan had witnessed Zhuowen's unfathomable strength, he treated Zhuowen like he was his own father. His attitude was so good that there was nothing that could be said about it. This is your reward. Zhuowen took out a pill and gave it to the old man. The latter looked at the pill in his hand suspiciously. Although he was nervous, he still swallowed it under Zhuowen's watchful gaze. After swallowing the pill, the old man's complexion turned rosy. His entire body was filled with vigor, as though he was a few years younger. My lord, is this a miracle pill? Zhongzhan asked excitedly. Lead the way. If you perform well, you will not be short of this pill. Zhuowen's expression was calm. The pill that he gave Zhongzhan was the most common body-strengthening pill. It was used by cultivators who had just stepped onto the path of martial arts to strengthen their body. This pill was too common in Heavenly Armor Planet. However, on Earth, where there was no cultivation, It was an extremely precious miracle pill. Zhongzhen agreed excitedly. In his heart, he was determined to hug Zhuowen's thigh tightly. After all, at his age, he already had enough wealth. What he lacked the most was health. The pill that Zhuowen casually gave out could actually revitalize his old body. This was much more precious than any gold or silver. After walking out of the five-star hotel, Zhongzhen quickly walked to the door of a Mercedes-Benz S-Class sedan in front of the door and personally opened the door for Zhuowen. Under the envious gazes of many people at the door, Zhuowen calmly entered the car. Zhongzhen walked to the other side and sat beside Zhuowen in the back seat, carefully serving him. Zhuowen sat in the car, leaned against the car pillow, and closed his eyes to rest. Seeing that Zhuowen was unwilling to speak, Zhongzhen did not want to disturb Zhuowen. Instead, he asked the driver to hurry to the Realm Night Group's headquarters. Half an hour later, the sedan stopped in the most prosperous area of Jinling City. It was brightly lit and bustling with people. In this area, the most dazzling building belonged to the Realm Night Group's headquarters, the Realm Night Building. This building was more than 600 meters tall. In this area, it stood out like a crane among chickens. It was extremely eye-catching. After getting out of the sedan, Zhongzhen enthusiastically led Zhuowen into the Realm Night Building. The elevator in the Realm Night Building was very fast. It only took a minute to reach the top floor. Elder Chen is in this room. Sir, let's go in. Zhongzhen pointed at the iron door at the end of the corridor and said to Zhuowen with a smile. However, the moment Zhongzhen took a step forward, he was immediately pulled back by Zhuowen. Then, the iron door immediately opened, and more than 30 fully armed soldiers walked out. These soldiers held explosion-proof shields that were as tall as a person. They walked side by side, and their cold muzzles were pointed at Zhuowen and Zhongzhen in the corridor. Behind these armed policemen stood a spirited old man. Although this old man had a head full of white hair, his eyes were sharp. It was obvious that this was a unique temperament formed by being in a high position for a long time. Next to the old man was a charming secretary in uniform. At this moment, the secretary was holding a folder in her hand and looking at the armed policeman in front of her with a pale face. She had just finished helping Elder Chen with the documents and was about to leave when she saw these armed policemen rushing out from another place. Then, the secretary saw that these 30 armed policemen were only targeting the old man and an ordinary young man in front of her. Elder Zhong. The secretary recognized the old man next to the young man. Then, she looked at Elder Chen and asked, Elder Chen, what happened? Why are the armed policemen being deployed? Chapter 2656. Mariana Zhongzhen trembled in fear. He wasn't afraid of the armed police, but he was afraid of Zhuowen. He clearly wanted to bring Zhuowen to have a good talk with Elder Chen, but he didn't expect Elder Chen to gather the armed police here to wait for him. Old Chen had a deep background, and he had connections with the Eastern Province's General Secretary. So he naturally had the ability to mobilize the armed police. Previously, Zhongzhen spoke to Old Chen over the phone and said that Zhuowen wasn't an ordinary person. He was a godlike figure, and handguns were useless against such an existence. During the call, Old Chen agreed to it, but he never thought that he would play dirty. Old Chen, don't be rash. This is an existence that you can't afford to offend. You're courting death. Zhongzhen trembled as he immediately spoke to Old Chen behind the armed police. Old Chen replied in disdain, Zhongzhen, what era are we in now? What godlike figure are you talking about? Is there something wrong with your head? Back then, when Zhongzhen spoke to him over the phone, Zhongzhen described that Zhuowen could withstand bullets without any injuries. Old Chen sneered in his heart, but he wasn't bothered by it. In modern society, how could there be such a person? Furthermore, Old Chen was even more disdainful of godlike figures. It was just a superstition made up by the ancients. The secretary stood beside Old Chen with her head filled with confusion. She looked at Old Chen nervously and asked, Old Chen, you're not intending to deal with them, right? This is the company. Old Chen coldly snorted, if they know what's good for them, I will naturally not give the order to shoot. As he spoke, Old Chen looked at the white-clothed youth beside Zhongzhen and asked, You're Zhuowen, right? I don't care how you stole my Kunlun jade pillar, but I'm giving you a chance. Hand over the Kunlun jade pillar, and you can still live. On the other hand, Zhongzhen was anxious as he immediately explained to Zhuowen that this matter had nothing to do with him. Zhuowen patted Zhongzhen's shoulder, indicating that he didn't blame the latter before he slowly walked towards Old Chen. He could tell that Zhongzhen wasn't lying to him. It must be Old Chen who wanted to kill him. Are you courting death? Old Chen's face darkened as he looked at the white-clothed young man who was walking towards him slowly. His eyes were filled with hostility. The secretary standing beside Old Chen also looked at Zhuowen in disbelief. In front of so many guns, how could this young man still dare to move forward? Could it be that there is something wrong with this person's head? Unfortunately, Elder Chen's words had no effect on Zhuowen. Zhuowen continued to walk over slowly. Seeing that Zhuowen was about to reach the armed police, Old Chen's eyes flashed with a trace of ferocity as he shouted, "Open fire." Elder Chen. The secretary looked at Old Chen in disbelief. This was a living person, and Old Chen actually gave the order to shoot. Bang bang bang. More than 30 pitch-black and ice-cold muzzles suddenly shot out dazzling sparks, and the sound of gunfire resounded in the corridor like thunder. The highest floor of the Genia building should be bulletproof and equipped with excellent soundproof materials. Therefore, some of the bullets that missed only left bullet marks on the walls. The coldness in Old Chen's eyes was immediately replaced by shock because he found that the white-clothed young man in the middle of the gunfire did not stop moving forward at all. Moreover, if one looked carefully, one could see that there was an invisible ripple defense in front of the young man, blocking the bullets that fell in front of the young man. A continuous stream of bullets fell in front of the young man, and then the bullets rustled and fell one by one, gathering into a pile of bullets at the young man's feet. The more than 30 armed police also showed a look of horror, and the same thought appeared in their minds at the same time. Is this still a human? Bang bang bang. When Zhuowen came in front of the armed police, he waved his hand. Instantly, these armed police officers who were holding riot shields were all sent flying. They swayed left and right, crashed into the walls on both sides, and rolled on the ground continuously. This, Old Chen looked at this scene in disbelief, and the secretary beside him was even more shocked with her beautiful eyes wide open. Old Chen, is there anything else you need to entertain me with? Zhuowen asked casually. Old Chen sat on the ground, pointed at Zhuowen, and said incoherently, "You. Who are you?" Zhuowen grabbed Old Chen with his right hand and lifted him up. A cool energy entered Old Chen's body, calming the originally panicking Old Chen down. After all, Old Chen was a person who had been in a high position for a long time. Although what happened to Zhuowen just now was beyond common sense, he also knew that he still had a bargaining chip in his hand. Old Chen, don't think that just because you know the whereabouts of the other Kunlun jade pillar, you have a bargaining chip to negotiate with me. If you think so, I will immediately kill you and search your memory, and I will also know the whereabouts of the Kunlun jade pillar. Zhuowen's next words immediately made Old Chen disheartened. Old Chen's strategy was unparalleled, but in the face of absolute strength, a mere strategy was not worth mentioning. Moreover, after seeing Zhuowen's terrifying ability, Old Chen was not surprised that this person had the ability to search his memory. Sir, this old man only begs you to spare my life. I will immediately tell you the whereabouts of the Kunlun jade pillar. Old Chen finally gave in. Let's talk inside. Zhuowen put down Old Chen and said indifferently. Old Chen nodded repeatedly, and ordered his secretary to prepare tea, while he led Zhuowen into his office. Old Chen's office was extremely large, more than 300 square meters, and the interior decoration was also extremely luxurious. Zhuowen casually sat in Old Chen's office chair and looked at Old Chen, who was standing respectfully at the side. Zhongzhen, on the other hand, was not far away, and his eyelids were lowered. Whether it was Old Chen or Zhuowen, their positions were much higher than his, and he was completely unable to get a word in. Speak. Zhuowen picked up the tea that his secretary had poured for him and slowly sipped it. For Zhuowen, directly searching Old Chen's memory was the best choice, but he did not intend to do so. In this mortal world, he did not intend to kill indiscriminately, as it would break the original rules of the mortal world. After all, the rules of Earth were not simple, and as long as it was not a big matter, Zhuowen would not kill indiscriminately. Old Chen wiped the cold sweat on his forehead and said, "Actually, I do have another Kunlun jade pillar, but as a precaution, I hid it 10,000 meters under the Mariana Trench." Mariana Trench? Zhuowen narrowed his eyes. He was not unfamiliar with the Mariana Trench. It was said to be the deepest trench in the world, with a depth of 10,000 meters. However, the Mariana Trench was not within Huaxia, but in Southeast Asia near the Pacific Ocean. Zhuowen's divine sense was powerful enough, but after entering Earth, most of its power had been suppressed. At most, his divine sense could only scan Huaxia. Chapter 2657. Whereabouts? Take it out immediately and hand it over to me, Zhuowen said coldly. Old Chen sighed in his heart. The Kunlun jade pillar had the effect of prolonging one's life and strengthening one's body. He had been keeping the Kunlun jade pillar by his side all this time. His spirit was much better than before, as if he was 10 years younger. Now that both of his Kunlun jade pillars had been taken away by this person, he knew that he would no longer be able to enjoy the benefits of the Kunlun jade pillar. However, he also knew that compared to the Kunlun jade pillar, his life was more important. I have great use for the Kunlun jade pillar. I know why you mortals want the Kunlun jade pillar. Take this bottle of elixir. It will help you expel all kinds of diseases and prolong your life by at least 20 years. Zhuowen casually tossed a jade bottle to Old Chen. Old Chen took the jade bottle skeptically. He opened the bottle out of curiosity and a medicinal aroma immediately filled the air. Just by smelling the medicinal fragrance, Elder Chen felt energized and his whole body felt light. Elder Chen's eyes were filled with excitement. He poured out a pill and couldn't wait to swallow it. Then, he was surprised to find that his body was warm, and he could clearly feel that his physical fitness was constantly improving and becoming stronger. Sir, this pill is so magical. Old Chen was excited. He wanted the Kunlun jade pillar because he wanted to use it to improve his body's quality. Since Zhuowen had given him this pill, the Kunlun jade pillar was of little value to him. Moreover, he also found that the effect of this pill on his body was much stronger than the Kunlun jade pillar. The Kunlun jade pillar was not originally used for nourishing, but this pill was a medicinal herb that was specially used for the human body. It was normal that the effect on Old Chen was better than the Kunlun jade pillar. You gave me the Kunlun jade pillar, so what if I give you another bottle? Zhuowen took out another jade bottle and placed it on the table. He looked at Old Chen indifferently. Inside the jade bottle was a life-continuing pill. Moreover, it was only a mortal-grade pill. It had the effect of prolonging the life of a criminal without any cultivation base, but for a cultivator of Zhuowen's level, it was simply trash. Zhuowen could easily refine such an elixir. The reason he gave it to Old Chen was because he wanted Old Chen to willingly hand over the Kunlun jade pillar. Sure enough, after Zhuowen took out such a pill and hinted that he had more pills in his possession, Elder Chen's thoughts about the Kunlun jade pillar lessened. Furthermore, in order to obtain the other bottle of pills in Zhuowen's hands, he couldn't wait to hand over the other Kunlun jade pillar to Zhuowen. Suddenly, Elder Chen's phone rang. Chen Laro looked at Zhuowen and didn't answer the phone. Take it. The bell rang several times before Zhuowen finally spoke. Old Chen nodded and picked up the phone to answer the call. His face immediately changed. What's wrong? Zhuowen's eyes flickered. The Kunlun jade pillar was found by the Country F army in the Mariana Trench and was seized by them. My people were basically all killed. Old Chen said angrily. Country F? Zhuowen asked. In his previous life, Zhuowen was a university student in Huaxia, so he was naturally familiar with the countries in the world. Country F was located in the western Pacific Ocean and was a multi-ethnic archipelago country in Southeast Asia. The Mariana Trench wasn't far from Country F. Although the Mariana Trench isn't far from Country F, you placed the Kunlun jade pillar 10,000 meters under the sea. Generally speaking, it shouldn't have been discovered by Country F. Zhuowen said lightly. Old Chen sighed. It should be a spy who leaked the news. It's hard to guard against a thief in the family. Now that the Kunlun Jade Pillar should be in the hands of Country FS president, this is troublesome. Speaking of this, Old Chen frowned. Although the Realm Knight Corporation that he controlled was huge, it was only a local tyrant in Jinling City. Compared to a country like Country F, it paled in comparison. Although Country F was only a small country, it still had complete military resources. It wasn't something that a mere corporation could compare to. Sir, what should we do? Old Chen looked at Zhuowen and was quite anxious. Although Zhuowen was powerful and couldn't even deal with guns, could he fight against cannons, fighter jets, and tanks? Follow me to Country F. Zhuowen said lightly. Sir, what do you plan to do when you go to Country F? Old Chen had a bad feeling. I'm going to rob them. If Country F doesn't give it to me, then I'll just destroy them. Zhuowen's voice was cold. Although he didn't want to cause trouble on Earth, this matter involved the Kunlun Jade Pillar, so he naturally had to take extreme measures. What? Sir, that's a country, and Country FS armed forces are made up of regular army, reserve army, and paramilitary forces. Among them, the regular army has 109,000 soldiers. The active army has 66,000 soldiers, organized into 8 infantry divisions, 23 infantry brigades, 8 artillery battalions, 1 armored brigade, 5 special forces brigades, and 1 presidential guard. The Navy has 26,000 soldiers, organized into 1 fleet headquarters, 6 Navy headquarters, and 4 Marine brigades. The Air Force has 17,000 soldiers, organized into 3 air divisions, 9 flying wings, and 7 service support wings. There's no way we can fight against such a large force. Sir, although you're strong, that's an entire country, Old Chen quickly said. Zhuowen smiled and didn't explain. Instead, he said lightly, Old Chen, you should have a private jet, right? Take me to Country F tomorrow. Also, inform the president of Country F to hand over the Kunlun Jade Pillar. Otherwise, Country F will cease to exist. Old Chen hesitated. Country F was a country, and Zhuowen dared to say such arrogant words. This was simply asking for death. Moreover, he was so brazen. Wasn't this telling Country F that not only did he dare to visit, but he also dared to destroy Country F by himself? This was definitely a slap to Country F's face. Old Chen believed that if he dared to bring Zhuowen's words to the president of Country F, when they entered Country F, what awaited them would be a fully armed army of 100,000, as well as terrifying tanks, cannons, and fighter jets. What? Didn't you hear what I said? Zhuowen looked at Old Chen, and a sharp killing intent suddenly attacked him. Old Chen was so scared that he fell to the ground. Yes, yes, yes. This old man will immediately do as you say. Old Chen felt bitter. He wasn't an idiot. He knew that if he dared to not do as Zhuowen said, he would immediately be destroyed. The next day, an earth-shattering piece of news was spreading all over the world at lightning speed. It was said that there was a person in Huaxia named Zhuowen who threatened to take something from the president of Country F, and if the president didn't hand it over, he would destroy Country F himself. This news was so shocking that many people, after being shocked, subconsciously thought that there was something wrong with this person's head. All the major forces in the world, both in the open and in the dark, were closely watching Country F and the young man named Zhuowen. Chapter 2658. Landing in Country F. What is the origin of this person? He dares to go against a country by himself. Oh my God, this man may have lost his mind. God, please save this lost lamb. This person is from Huaxia. Will it affect the relationship between Huaxia and Country F? The world's leaders were also paying close attention and received news from intelligence agents from time to time. Although they all thought that the young man was crazy, what really caught their attention was Country F's actions. Because according to the information they received, Country F gathered 100,000 regular troops in the name of a drill and gathered all these regular troops in Country F's capital, Manila. The world leaders were not fools. They all knew that Country F's drill was fake and that it was probably to guard against the young man named Zhuowen. Of course, What they could not understand was that Country F was too much. He was just an ordinary person. Was there a need to gather 100,000 regular troops? Inside the presidential palace in City M, President Duterte frowned. He held a slender jade pillar in his hand as if he was thinking about something. Mr. President, the Realm Knight Corporation's private jet has left Huaxia and will arrive in Country F in about an hour. A general in military uniform stood straight and stared at Duterte, who was sitting in a chair in front of him and thinking hard. Launch a long-range missile and shoot down that private jet. Duterte tapped the table with his right hand and said lightly. The general nodded. Although he felt that Duterte's decision was making a mountain out of a molehill, he did not refute his president. After the general left, a charming woman slowly walked in from the back door. The woman had a perfect body and delicate face. She was a peerless beauty. Mr. President, why did you mobilize so many people? You're only dealing with one person, not an entire country. The charming woman leaned on Duterte's body and said softly. From the captives we captured, it is said that the Realm Knight Corporation sent a godlike person who is not afraid of bullets. Although I know that I mobilized so many people, it's never wrong to be careful. Anyway, this is just a drill. I don't think Huaxia will have any excuse to make trouble for us if we accidentally hit a private jet with a long-range missile. After all, this can only be considered an accident. Duterte hugged the woman and said with a smirk. Mr. President, you're still so wise. The woman whispered into Duterte's ear. Suddenly, the sound of hurried footsteps came from outside. Then, the general who had just left hurriedly walked in. What's wrong? Duterte asked coldly. The general bent down and said in a trembling voice, General, the long-range missile failed. Duterte said nonchalantly, since the launch failed, then launch another one. How do you usually train your subordinates to make such mistakes? The general quickly shook his head and said, Mr. President, the long-range missile was successfully launched, but the long-range missile hit the plane and exploded. However, the plane is safe and sound and continues to fly towards us. Nothing happened even after a long-range missile hit the plane. Are you trying to make fun of me? Duterte thought that the general was joking and said with an unfriendly expression. No, Mr. President, look at this video. This is the surveillance video from the missile department. The general quickly took out a tablet and turned it on. The video showed a small private plane. When the rainbow-like missile appeared in the video, it directly exploded on the plane. Then, a miraculous scene appeared. In the terrifying explosion, the plane slowly flew out without any damage. How is this possible? The president and the woman were stunned. Continue to launch the missiles. I don't believe that we can't destroy this plane. Duterte said while panting. The general left the presidential palace uneasily. He didn't know why, but when he found that the plane was ineffective against the long-range missile, he felt uneasy. We're not dead. Inside the plane, old Chen, the secretary, Zhongzhan, and the pilot looked around in fear. When they found that they were still in the plane and that the plane was intact, they all showed expressions of relief. The moment the long-range missile landed on the plane, they thought that they were finished. They didn't expect that they were fine. Then, their eyes all fell on the young man sitting on the left, leisurely leaning against the wall. They knew that the reason why the plane was fine was most likely related to this young man. Not good, a few more long-range missiles are coming. The pilot's panicked voice came. Old Chen and the others' hearts were in their throats, but they soon found that the long-range missiles still landed on the plane, but they were still fine. But the more it was like this, the more they respected the young man sitting leisurely on the side. Even long-range missiles couldn't do anything to this person. How terrifying was this person? When the plane finally landed in Country F under the bombardment of countless long-range missiles, the leaders of Country F and even the whole world were shocked. Everyone realized that something was wrong. Country F's President Duterte even walked out of his palace and stared at the small plane in the sky. Fighter team, get ready. Destroy this plane. Duterte reacted quickly and immediately gave the order. Soon, in Country F, more than 10 fighter jets flew out. These fighter jets spewed out terrifying jets and then flew high into the sky at an extremely fast speed. More than a dozen fighter jets surrounded the small plane and released their missiles. More than 10 missiles bombarded the small plane. In the sky, a dazzling explosion of energy dust attracted the attention of everyone in Country F. Immediately after, the people of Country F were shocked to find that the small plane that was attacked leisurely flew out of the explosion, and then a bloody light flew out of the plane. Everyone only saw the bloody light flash in the sky, and more than 10 fighter jets all exploded. Amidst the countless explosions, the small plane slowly landed in City MS Harbor. At this moment, City MS Harbor was surrounded by 100,000 regular soldiers, and nearly 100 tanks surrounded the harbor. The door of the small plane opened, and a young man in casual clothes was the first to walk out. The bloody light in the sky landed next to the young man. Chapter 2659. Duterte saw from the computer screen that the blood sword destroyed the few dozen fighter jets of Country F and landed beside the youth in casual clothes. His face was full of disbelief. "Mr. President, this is not a human. Do we still have to continue?" An officer beside Duterte was trembling. His voice was full of fear. He never thought that a human could have such terrifying power. In other words, was this really a human? Now, the officer was hoping that Duterte would immediately stop the war and make peace. Duterte's pupils shrank. Although he was shocked by Zhuowen's move, he was still the leader of a country. His mind was naturally more mature than the average person. Duterte held the Kunlun jade pillar in his hand. He knew that the youth came for the Kunlun jade pillar. If it was before, Duterte would definitely not care about the Kunlun jade pillar. But now that Duterte had experienced the benefits of the Kunlun jade pillar, he naturally would not let it go so easily. Moreover, this person only brought a few people and forcefully landed in Country F. He was the president of Country F. If he was trampled on like this and had to hand over the pillar in his hand with a smile, Country F's reputation in the world would really be tarnished. This person may be an ancient martial arts master in Huaxia, but he is only one person. We have more than 100,000 soldiers. Why should we be afraid of this person? Duterte sneered and continued, "General Booker, pass down my order. Kill this person on the spot. Leave no one alive." General Booker was the officer next to Duterte. General Booker smiled bitterly. He did not expect the president to still want to attack after seeing this person's inhuman strength. He did not know if it was right or wrong for Country F to provoke such a strong person. However, General Booker also thought that Country F's 100,000 soldiers were enough to take down the youth. After all, he was only one person, while they had a powerful army of 100,000. Zhuowen walked down and stood in place. Elder Chen, Zhongzhen, and the others walked down and stood behind Zhuowen. When Old Chen and the others saw the endless army surrounding them, as well as the pitch-black muzzles of nearly 100 tanks aimed at them, they were all scared witless and trembling. Their hearts were beating like drums. Facing such a powerful army, did the young man in front of them really have a chance of winning? Zhuowen stood in place, not because he was afraid of the surrounding troops, but because he was waiting for Country F President Duterte's decision. If Duterte obediently handed over the Kunlun jade pillar, he would naturally not start a massacre but leave. Unfortunately, what happened next did not go as Zhuowen had expected. The surrounding troops began to get restless. Soon after, concentrated gunshots rang out and countless sparks burst forth, shooting toward Zhuowen. At the same time, the cannons on the tanks fired at the same time. Terrifying shells exploded on the spot like fireworks. Suddenly, the place where Zhuowen and the others were was turned into ruins. Only the embryonic form of a large crater could be vaguely seen in the smoke. Duterte saw this scene on the computer screen and revealed a smug smile. In his view, no matter how powerful the youth was, he would definitely die in such a hail of bullets. But soon, he was shocked to find that in the smoke, a blood-red light soared into the sky. Then, a ring-shaped blood-red light swept in all directions. Wherever the blood-red light passed, whether it was the army, the fortifications, or the tanks, everything was annihilated into nothingness. In just an instant, the surrounding 100,000 soldiers were all annihilated by the blood-red light and turned into nothingness as if they were vaporized. Duterte watched the army he relied on being annihilated just like that. He stood in place as if he was petrified. General Booker also came in at this moment, but he looked like he had lost his soul, like a walking corpse. Mr. President, our country FS regular army was annihilated. General Booker's mouth was full of bitterness. He half knelt on the ground, his voice trembling. Duterte suddenly smashed the computer, like a violent lion, and said, "I don't believe it, I don't believe it. It's just one person. How could he have such powerful strength? This person must have used some kind of camouflage, or my computer must have been hacked. That must be it." General Booker just silently knelt in front of him and did not say anything. He knew that he could not speak at will now. "Your country FS President Duterte?" Suddenly, a calm voice was heard. But strangely, the voice did not appear in the room, but in the minds of General Booker and Duterte. Duterte subconsciously took a few steps back. Looking at the youth in casual clothes slowly walking in from the front door of the presidential palace, the fear in his eyes became more intense. It should be noted that the presidential palace was at least 200 kilometers away from the port. Even with the fastest sports car, it would take more than an hour. However, it had only been a few minutes since this person destroyed the regular army, and he had already arrived at the presidential palace. What kind of speed was this? Old Chen, Zhongzhen, and the others followed behind Zhuowen. They looked at Zhuowen with eyes full of fanaticism and awe. The move that Zhuowen showed just now was really shocking. They really could not imagine how a human could have such power. Only an immortal could have such means. This was the consensus in the hearts of Old Chen, Zhongzhen, and the others. General Booker, who was kneeling on the ground, was so frightened that he quickly got up and wanted to escape. Unfortunately, Zhuowen only looked at General Booker indifferently, and the latter fell to the ground as if he was electrocuted. He died just like that. Zhuowen was no stranger to General Booker. This guy was the one who ordered the regular army to attack him. Of course, he also knew that it was under Duterte's instructions. However, there was no doubt that General Booker was an accomplice. Duterte was completely shocked. Only then did he realize that his presidential palace had become much quieter than usual. It should be known that the presidential palace's security was the strictest in the entire country of Country F. Now that someone had forced their way in, logically speaking, the garrison should have already been alerted. However, there was no movement at all. Obviously, Duterte also knew that the garrison stationed in the presidential palace had already been attacked. "Duterte, I have already asked Old Chen to speak to you. Hand over the Kunlun Jade Pillar, and I, Zhuowen, will not blame Country F. Unfortunately, your choice has disappointed me." Zhuowen continued to speak. Although Country F's language was different from Huashia's, Zhuowen had already flipped through Country F's language dictionary before coming to Country F. It only took him a few minutes to master Country F's language. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.